Hello and welcome to another edition of the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm your host, Mark Dankenbring, and we'll be joined today by the projections crew you know and love, Jack Miller and Ben Gretch. Jack and I are part of the NFL projections team here at Establish the Run, entering our fourth year together, doing this full time. Pretty wild there. And then Gretch is our honored guest. You can listen to his podcast, Stealing Bananas with Sean Siegel, as well as find his work at bengretch.substack.com. We are on to episode 3 of this series, and we'll be going through all 4 teams in the AFC West today. Gretch, how you doing today?
I'm good. We were talking before the show. Our first 2 have been a little long as we get used to this 3-man, balance and everything. But those divisions weren't even that interesting. I think the AFC West is the most interesting division this year. I mean, I think the Chargers are the most interesting team. I think a lot of people would agree with that, but I think we got some other really interesting stuff to talk about today. So if the people who clicked on this and are listening to the first minute have already seen that it's a 3-hour podcast, that'll be the reason why.
Absolutely. We'll do our best to, condense it all into the actual knowledge you all need out there. But yeah, certainly a lot to talk through today. Jack, how you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. We did go, I think, 45 minutes on the Texans last show, and now we've got the Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos to talk about. So hopefully we can condense it into some more actionable and streamlined information. But I'm excited to be here. I think the first 2 have been pretty good, so I'm happy.
Yeah, corporate has yet to shut us down here, so we will continue headstrong here into the AFC West. As Gretch mentioned, a very exciting division here, not only for fantasy purposes, but also real life, football here. Broncos, Chargers, and Chiefs, 3 of the strongest teams on paper in the AFC West. And the Broncos, we will start there as they are returning almost everyone from their roster last year. So in that regard, seem relatively straightforward, but they do add Jalen Waddle in an offseason trade. And then I think probably the biggest thing from a team level standpoint is that Sean Payton has decided to give up play calling, and we'll turn that over to Davis Webb. So Sean Payton remains the head coach here, but Davis Webb is apparently going to be the new play caller here. Quote here from Sean Payton, he said when he was asked, or he said in February that he was going to relinquish play calling duties because he was, quote, frustrated with some parts of the team's offense, pacing during games, getting plays to Knicks to get the team in and out of the huddle better, and on an inconsistent run game. So the no huddle there could potentially increase under Davis Webb potentially. And then, the Broncos and Sean Payton have been notorious for rotating players in and out this season or the past couple of years. So I'm interested to see how that plays this season here. On a team level standpoint for the Broncos, at ETR, we're at 62.2 plays projection, and 61.9% pass rate. Gretch is a little bit higher on the plays at 63.1 and at a 62% pass rate. So near identical pass rates there. Gretch a little bit higher on plays, which again I think could be a sign or an intention here for the Broncos, as they have been a fast-paced team under Payton, but could maybe get even faster under Davis Webb. So Gretch, I do want to toss this to you first, just since we have the coordinator change with Davis Webb. What are your thoughts on Sean Payton relinquishing his play calling duties and turn it over to Davis Webb here?
Well, I think Webb's going to be trying to. I think Payton's a pretty firm hand, and I think Webb's he's a very young coordinator, first-time coordinator that got promoted from within when he was getting some potential head coaching buzz and things like that. I do think it's a little bit of Payton kind of throwing him a bone, and I'm not treating it as if there's going to be a major change. I think it's going to be basically Payton's had his tendencies in the ways that he's done things for a long time, and they've been unique for a long time. Some of the rotational stuff you talked about, and the way that I talk about him is that the league has kind of moved toward him. Like a lot of the Silva always loves the term of the cocoon, and a lot of the retread coaches and stuff, they haven't been able to evolve with the sport. But Payton has always loved the rotational and different personnel packages and all that stuff. And that's what's actually becoming more necessary to have a successful offense in the future. And it's well, this is how I already designed my offense. So I think things have worked kind of well, but I do think Payton's a really sharp offensive mind. And I think they're going to have things. He's still going to be a part of game planning. He's still going to have the install and the all the play calls that they come up with and what they're going to do. And I mean, the way that these call sheets are here's our plays on first and long and second and long, and obviously first and 10, second and long, third and long, second and short, third and short. All these things are going to be designed in advance. He's still going to be designing the red zone stuff, which I think he does really, really well. or at least involved with, right? And then the calls will be what they are, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a difference. You mentioned the slight difference in play volume, and we've had this as a trend. I've been a little hotter than you guys, and I told you guys what I was like. I'm not done with my projections, but what my target was going to be was a little higher than yours. I think I'm going to come in above my target. I tried to look into that after we did our first two shows and see if I'm getting too hot on that. I do think it's interesting that the teams, like there were some teams, like pace was slower last year for sure, but there were some teams that were way low in pace. There was three that were down about like 56 plays per game, which was the Raiders. We'll talk about them today. The Dolphins and Vikings. They're all offenses that were really poor last year. And I do think I think there's a downward shift, but I do think some of why the play volume dropped as much as it did is these offenses that were just like non-functional. Like we know that defenses are kind of ahead and they're non-functional. They're not able to actually sustain stuff and they're like giving up in some of these games. So anyway, I'm gonna probably keep coming in a little hot because I do project these offenses like things go the way that they plan them, right? And so I'm thinking a little bit more optimistically with some of my projections. I think that gap for us here in Denver is probably pretty similar to in relation to where our averages will be. But like you said, they were 10th in seconds per snap. They were 6th in pass rate over expected. They were 5th in total play volume last year. One of the things that I really got confused about with Denver is their implied touchdowns are like slightly below league average when you look at the look ahead lines. And I just think this is a much better offense than the market does, I guess, with everything I just said about Peyton. They scored 43 and 42 touchdowns in Nick's first 2 years. My model wanted them at 40.5, so coming down. I'd argue they should be better. Like they were really poor in the first month of Nick's rookie year. Last year, they had some really complicated travel stuff in the middle of the year that we can talk about, but I was writing about them every week as if people were getting the wrong idea about some of their poor offensive games. They were the first team to ever go from an international game all the way back to the Mountain Time Zone the next week. Like the teams get the option of using their bye after they travel internationally. They declined it. So they went road game in Philly, didn't come home, went to England, flew back to Denver and hosted the Giants the next week. And that was a game where they were down by a ton and came all the way back and won. They won all those games, but they had a poor offensive showing against, I think, the Jets in England, a poor showing for 3 quarters against the Giants back at home. A couple weeks later, they had their Thursday night game against the Raiders, and they had a poor showing on a short week, which they still had not had their bye, and they're still probably struggling with that stretch in the middle of their season. They managed to win all those games. The way I said it on the Broncos and the way that I think they were a little misunderstood is people, I think, hit them so hard for being 14-3. I think if they would have lost more of those games, people would have given them more of a pass. But it was like they're a fraudulent 14-3 team because they were winning all these games ugly during a really tough travel schedule. And so anyway, their offense did look poor at times, but I have a hard time understanding why they would be worse in Nick's third season with Jalen Waddle on the roster. And I think this is a better team.
Yeah, and play volume and overall volume for this team and Bo Nix has been a big positive for them. Gretch mentioned, 5th in total plays last year. They were also 6th in pass rate over expectation. Only one of 8 teams that had a positive PROE last season. And Bo Nix ended up leading the NFL in pass attempts last year, which is pretty solid for fantasy value. Even if he's not the most efficient on a per play basis, it continues to look like this is going to be a high tempo, high pass rate offense, especially with the addition of Jalen Waddle. So Jack, let's get into Bo Nix's outlook a little bit. Recovering from offseason ankle surgery, had that man, just one of the wildest swings ever. I'm living in Denver now, and the Broncos win that playoff game to make it to the AFC Championship against the Patriots. And then like an hour after the game, it comes out, Bo Nix broke his ankle, is going to require surgery and is out. And it was one of the wildest, swings just in terms of emotional, sports fandom that I've seen in this city, kind of losing out on that. But Bo Nix, should be healthy in this season. What's your outlook for Nix returning from this ankle surgery in his 3rd NFL season?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing with Nix is from pass rate, and I wanted to bring that up as it relates to the team level stuff because the Broncos were 6th in pass rate over expectation overall last year, but they had some really big splits with and without J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins got hurt in week 10 last year. In weeks 1 through 10, their pass rate over expectation, their average single game PROE was minus 0.7. Their average pass rate was 61%. In weeks 11 through 20, they had a plus 4.6% pass rate over expectation, excluding the game with Stidham. Those are only the Bo Nix games. And a 65.8% pass rate overall. So those are some pretty stark splits. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that Sean Payton didn't really trust RJ Harvey. We'll get more into the running backs in a minute here. But it seems like the more recent stuff on Nix's ankle has been positive. So I'm not as concerned about that, although we'll see once we get into training camp how that looks. But I thought that the pass rate dipping back down to where it was in weeks 1 through 10 with Dobbins healthy was worth bringing up. And both us and Gretch are closer to the 61% that they were at last year. We're at 61.9 and Gretch is right at 62.
Yeah, that's a great note on the PROE split there with kind of before and after Dobbins, and then they definitely did not expect their run game to be super successful on the ground. And I think back to this game against the Raiders they had in week 14 where they were up pretty much the entire game, and Bo Nix just continued to throw and complete short passes. He was 31 of 38 in that game, but only threw for 212 yards. So like they just essentially made the short passing game an extension, of their arm game. We've kind of heard that terminology used a little bit around the league, and I think that certainly was the case for the Broncos down the stretch. So yeah, that's a great point there. Gretch, I'm curious your thoughts on our Bo Nix inputs here. Obviously, you come in a little bit higher on pass attempts, just again given the little bit higher play volume there for him. We are pretty even on rushing. You're a little bit ahead of us there. I'm curious if you think this Bo Nix ankle surgery, affects his mobility much coming into this upcoming season.
Well, it's certainly a concern, but he's been pretty mobile. I got through my projection, and probably not a surprise based on everything I was saying about how I feel about the team. I was higher than the market number on like my expected model on their implied touchdowns, and so I had to kind of nuke them. And Nix has had above average rush TD rates. I had to go below average for him on that and bring that down. I think the scrambling and the rushing side, I'm a little higher than you guys as well. I mean, like purely just yardage, but I feel like his rushing is actually a pretty big asset. I mean, it's not a massive asset, but it's definitely there. And then I also had to go below his average pass TD rate from the first 2 years, which again, he's going into year 3 and added Jalen Waddle and has had the first 4 games of his rookie year were terrible. They were bad enough. It's a quarter of your season. They were bad enough to really hurt his rookie year overall numbers in a meaningful way. But he got better from there. And then last year they had a bunch of these really poor games during the tough travel period of their season. And I'm going under those numbers. This guy's been a low-end QB1 both seasons, and I think they've both arguably been negatively impacted by situational stuff. I think it's a fantasy-friendly QB profile with the rushing and the even with the pass rate being a little lower with the J.K. Dobbins thing, which is a great point from Jack. It's still an offense that throws with some intent. I mean, they use the running backs intentionally in the pass game. We're going to talk about this a little bit when we get to the Chargers as well, because I'm really interested about the running back receiving stuff in their offense. But Payton's always done the types of play calls that are like first read passes to the running back, which I do think is something that's very interesting in the modern NFL, where for a long time it was like tight ends, you get a better mismatch. And I think the tight ends thing is like teams will put a cornerback on a tight end or do different things to try to take away the tight end. Now we're getting to this point where if you get to the 5th eligible and you don't just treat him the running back and you don't just treat him as like an outlet, but you throw to him with intent, which is something Mike McDaniel did, is why I bring in the Chargers. I'm thinking of the Devon Achane like angle routes where Tua would get it out super quick. And it's like he's the first read. And you go back to Sean Payton with the Saints. You go back to the Darren Sproles years. They did that a ton. He did that with RJ Harvey a lot last year. That's part of the pass rate thing. They're using the run game as an extension. The short pass game is an extension of the run. RJ Harvey's getting these swing passes. He's getting some of the little quick angle stuff over the middle, where it's not, if my receivers aren't open, I'll get down to the running back. It's I'm throwing to the running back immediately. And the reason that works is they can also keep the running back in. And if you devote too many resources to the running back, I mean, he pass blocks. Now we have, numbers downfield with the wide receivers. So it's this element of these offenses that I do think is one of the next progressions of all of this stuff for some of these different offenses. But Payton's been doing it for 20 years. Like I was saying, go back to the Sproles, go back to the Reggie Bush years, even with the Saints. He did it with Harvey a lot. That helps Nix's numbers. It's really weird to me that Nix is going as low as he is. I honestly think he's one of the best fantasy QB prices because he's a boring player. I don't think people think he's as good as maybe he actually is. Frankly, yeah. A lot of sources have this as the number 1 offensive line in the league as well, and he doesn't take sacks. which helps the offense. It keeps him on schedule. It's part of the reason I don't understand the touchdown thing or even their win total over under. I've taken their over. This is my strongest win total over bet of the year is the Broncos. I think this is a great way to capture the upside of this offense as well. When we get to the receivers, we'll talk about it, but you mentioned it, the rotational stuff. 2 years ago, they didn't have a single player other than Sutton over 400 routes. Last year, we got Troy Franklin over that number, and he was bad, and he kind of was dropping routes late in the year, but he was one guy who consolidated that second number of routes, but they're very rotational behind typically that 1X receiver. It'll be interesting this year with Waddle. We'll get to that. But one of the ways to capture some upside on this offense, if you do think it's a decent offense that will score touchdowns again and maybe even be better than the last 2 years like I'm describing, is Bo Nix. I mean, this is a pretty straightforward, got some rushing, got some pass rate, got some TD upside to him. So I'm pretty pumped about Nix's price.
Yeah, and we're a couple spots below Nix's ADP on Underdog. We're well above on DraftKings. I will add, just to aid Gretch's bullishness on this offense, that there has been a lot of buzz this year about Davis Webb's offense wanting to play faster. I will say that a lot of it seems to be getting to the line of scrimmage faster and kind of letting Nix diagnose the defense rather than we want to play as fast as we possibly can. But it certainly seems like pace is going to be something that they are emphasizing throughout the offseason.
Yeah, and to that point, Bo Nix was QB8 as a rookie and QB11 in points per game last season, and so I was looking at the same thing you guys were kind of like, because we're at QB17 on Underdog. He's going at QB15. I was like, man, I feel like we should be higher than QB17. I looked at the gap between quarterback 7, who we have as Dak Prescott, and quarterback 17 and Bo Nix. It's 10 total fantasy points across the season. So it's a huge, combined cluster. And so when you're talking, especially in best ball, about stacking, it's like, man, if you take Bo Nix as the QB8 or QB9, even if we have him ranked as the QB17, the point differential there is pretty minuscule. It takes a couple passing TDs or a rush touchdown here or there to really close that gap. So that's again, kind of one of the difficulties of projections versus rankings is man, it seems like a massive difference between Dak at QB7 and Bo Nix at QB17, but it's really not from a projections and input standpoint. And so if we are, just generally a little bit more bullish on Bo Nix than maybe the final projection, maybe we can bump that up a little bit. But again, the margins are pretty small there. Let's get into the backfield here. Super interesting trio with J.K. Dobbins getting re-signed in the offseason. He was seen as a priority investment for the Broncos, kind of noted throughout the offseason there. R.J. Harvey coming into his second season, who I think a little bit similar to Woody Marks was kind of like thrust into a role that he probably wasn't ready for as a rusher and did not deliver on the ground either. And then they draft Jonah Coleman in the 4th round, 5'10", 228-pound back who, J.K. Dobbins is listed at 212, Harvey 205. So easily the biggest back in this room now. Should be kind of an interesting trio here. I honestly don't know if there's like a whole lot to talk about in terms of the split between Dobbins and Harvey, just because I think it's pretty straightforward. Last year when Dobbins was healthy, he outcarried Harvey 153 to 50. So pretty much 3-1 in the carries there. Harvey's per game, rushing statistics when Dobbins was healthy, he averaged 5 rush attempts per game, 21.4 rushing yards. And as Gretch alluded to, he was more kind of like the first read target in the pass game. He did catch 4 receiving touchdowns in those first 10 games. But Jack, curious your thoughts on the split here between Dobbins and Harvey. It's almost like how healthy can J.K. Dobbins stay this season, just given his efficiency last year and the Broncos priority to bring him back. Seems like they want him to be the clear RB1. But how about you talk through the split we have there between Dobbins and Harvey? Because inputs wise, we are a little bit behind Dobbins compared to Gretch, about 50 carries behind there, and about 30 to 35 carries ahead on RJ Harvey.
Right, like you said, I think a lot of it comes down to the injury risk, and with Gretch not baking that in as much, it makes sense to me that he's at 213 carries. We're at 168 on Dobbins. But like you said, it was extremely clear that the Broncos didn't really trust Harvey much as a rookie, as a runner at least. 153 to 50 carries gap. Dobbins was more efficient on a per carry basis, over 1 yard per carry higher than Harvey. And Harvey was brutally inefficient from a rush yards over expected per carry standpoint. He was at minus 0.64. He was highly utilized in the passing game, even though he wasn't actually playing on passing downs. He averaged 0.28 targets per route run. But it's an interesting needle to thread for Harvey, where he's not playing pass downs, but he's heavily utilized as a receiver. I think that's something we could see again this year because they clearly like getting the ball in his hands as a pass catcher, but they've already been talking up the fourth round rookie Jonah Coleman as someone who could play on pass downs. We saw Tyler Bidet in that role last year. I think the most interesting question from a fantasy standpoint here is what the carry split looks like if slash when J.K. Dobbins goes down, and if Harvey or Coleman would be the one to emerge there and really get the bulk of the early down work.
Yeah, I think, Gretch, I'm curious your thoughts on the Dobbins projection and just kind of how you view him, because it is tough with players like this who, I don't want to say like the verdict is out, but he just hasn't been able to handle big volume year in and year out. He has a career high 195 carries with the Chargers in 2024. He gets hurt, and then last year got to 153 before going down. Again, we were at 168. You're at 213. So just kind of take me through your thoughts on this Dobbins and maybe your overall thoughts on these quote unquote, like injury prone players and how you project them from a seasonal perspective.
Well, yeah, part of it as well is concerned about Harvey's rushing in year one, and then how Coleman impacts Harvey, because I do think Coleman's going to play. And so, I mean, I did my write-up over at my Stealing Signals newsletter on the Broncos, and then I got more questions about the Broncos backfield, and I wrote a whole nother piece called RJ Harvey is an Enigma. So if you want really long thoughts from me on it, go read that. I'm not going to take us down a half an hour diatribe, but Sean Payton's running back usage, dating back to those Darren Sproles years even, was actually the topic of my first fantasy football article in 2015. It's something I've studied for the years since then quite a bit. I've talked about it on this show in past years as well. But he like Jack mentioned, he'll have a running back that he throws to with intent in the passing game, and you see the gap between the targets per out on Harvey and Dobbins, and I do think that shows the intent to get Harvey the ball in space that Jack mentioned. I do think Harvey's going to have that type of a role, and the receiving plus red zone is pretty strong for him. He also got some decent air yards. They were doing some things to get him vertically, although he was about as efficient in that role as you can be. He had so much on. He hit on those big plays. He had 12 touchdowns. His rushing was basically all with Dobbins out and was not good. The one role that Peyton didn't have last year was basically the Javonte Williams role from the year prior. And if you go way back, it was Pierre Thomas a long time ago, and then it became Mark Ingram. Early in Mark Ingram's career, he was basically a rusher only. He didn't play on pass downs. And then as soon as Pierre Thomas aged out, Ingram started doing both. But it's this guy who can do a little bit of both, who could be trusted to be in pass protection. It's why Javonte, even when he wasn't very efficient coming off the multi-ligament knee injury, was still playing a ton and got a ton of work in 2024. That's what Jonah Coleman looks like as a prospect. There's nothing about him that screams that he's an elite prospect, but they love the pass blocking. He was efficient as a runner. He was efficient in the passing game. He didn't test at the combine because he probably wouldn't have tested great. He's a bigger back, but he gets yardage. He's like a little bowling ball, and he gets yardage with the work that he does get. Very efficient in college. Had more of a breakaway rate than you'd think for a bigger back. Had more of a receiving role. I've compared him to Josh Jacobs, and this is another one of these UW guys that's, I watched all of his plays because this is my college. He reminds me of Jacobs. Obviously, Jacobs is a very, very good player. I don't think Jonah Coleman's going to be that player, but in terms of like, Josh Jacobs always has a better yards per carry than I think he should. To me, he's a plotter, and then you go look at it, and he's got a 4.8 yards per carry. Like, he gets yards. He gets downhill, and he does everything. He pass blocks, he catches. Coaches love it. I think Jonah Coleman's going to play a little bit in that Javonte role if he's up for it. And if he is, in that Javonte role, meaning on obvious pass downs because of his pass blocking ability, etc. If he is, I think that hurts Harvey's rushing quite a bit. And then it kind of hurts Harvey's receiving, but not quite as much because Harvey's not probably out there for pass blocking. He's out there for the plays where he's just going out into a route and they may throw to him with intent. This like sort of Darren Sproles role. Jonah Coleman's the Pierre Thomas, and then J.K. Dobbins is the rusher only. That's sort of the Mark Ingram. If you go back to that mold from 10 years ago, but Payton's had different molds, and he's talked about it's tough to get three backs in. Once he had Kamara, he did things a little differently. But the thing with Kamara was always in a bit of a committee. He never had like 80% plus snap shares, even when he was like RB3 in fantasy, like a superstar. He always still gave up more snaps than you'd think, but he was this stud that played in all the high value situations. again, I don't know how that's going to look this year. There's a lot more to it, but to the Dobbins point, Dobbins, I think, is definitely going to get the rushing work. And I think that's where you can start. I do think he didn't get a lot of receiving last year, and I don't think he's going to get a ton of receiving. I think he's going to be mostly rushing only. He was 4th in the league in rush yards over expected per attempt out of 48 qualified running backs at NFL Pro. Harvey was 46th in the same offense, right? You got a guy that's top 5, you got a guy that's bottom 3. I think Dobbins is clearly the better rusher. I think he's going to be the lead runner whenever he's in. And then the question is, how much of the secondary rushes does Harvey even get? I mean, I think I'm projecting him to come way down. And I think he'll be a big cut.
I want to get into that just because the fantasy outlook here is pretty convoluted in terms of like their ADP right now. RJ Harvey is the first running back getting drafted from this backfield, and it sounds like none of us are very, very excited about his kind of role in this offense with J.K. Dobbins healthy, and especially Gretch, if you think Jonah Coleman's going to get some work. He's going in around 87 on underdog, so J.K. Dobbins at around pick 100, and then Jonah Coleman at 153. So you have these guys going all within 60 picks of each other essentially, and so I have a tough time kind of seeing where RJ Harvey's like consistent fantasy value comes from, especially if Dobbins goes down, and we think Jonah Coleman maybe is probably the favorite for like early down carries in that spot. You maybe hit on that a little bit, Gretch, but curious if you do think Jonah Coleman, given the lackluster efficiency we saw from RJ Harvey as a rusher rookie season, like if Dobbins goes down, who do you think is the favorite for early down carries there?
Yeah, it will depend on. That's where I went in. I titled that one piece RJ Harvey's an enigma, because he had a good rushing profile in college, and he was so bad last year. He's a year 2 player that was efficient as a rookie, at least in touchdown scoring and some of the receiving. They wanted to get the ball in his hand. They showed real intent. They used him a lot when Dobbins went down. But I also think they went out and got Jonah Coleman specifically because when Dobbins went down, they didn't have everything they wanted to cover in the running game. Some people are listening going, why is he talking about a running back split for the Saints 10 years ago? And that's very fair. My point was like, that's sort of like a mold that I work off of, or a framework with Peyton, but I think he's had a lot of different ways of doing it since then. And it depends on who the actual players are. We talked about this with some of the other stuff with the multi-tight end sets. How good the talent actually is going to dictate it. So is Jonah Coleman even up to being any of this, right? Is a huge part of it. He's a rookie we don't know about. And then can RJ Harvey take a step forward as a rusher is another element. And so if J.K. Dobbins goes down, I genuinely don't know. But I do think, based on Harvey having the struggles last year and them going out and getting Coleman, that Coleman has more of a path to being that than the market probably currently sees, because that's sort of what his profile is, as well as, like, I call them first rule do no harm running backs. Like they can do everything. They don't make coaches mad because they get the yards that are there. They get the blocked yardage. They get downhill, right? Like Harvey's whole issue is like the same thing that people get mad about with Kenneth Walker and other things. He's always bouncing. He's not hitting the hole directly. They're not getting these downhill yards. That's what J.K. Dobbins is incredible at. I think J.K. Dobbins, for all of his injuries, is still an incredibly talented rusher, which is why he's clearly going to be their lead runner, I think, on early downs while healthy. If he gets hurt, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. You have 2 young backs, and it depends on who's going to be the more effective. I think they're both going to play, and then whoever's more effective will be the one that will get more work, is the way that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I will say we come in quite a bit below ADP on Coleman just because it is so hard to get 3 guys significant volume. The market does like Jonah Coleman quite a bit, at least for an RB3. He might be the highest RB3 drafted on underdog right now. I'm pretty sure he is, but he's going ahead of guys like Spears, Algier, Tank Bigsby, who are pretty locked in as the RB2 on their team. And just because of where the market is, it's been a little tough for us to get to Coleman all off season.
100%. I think this is a tougher backfield for best ball than it is redraft. Like in half PPR redraft leagues, I feel pretty good about taking J.K. Dobbins, if he's going in the 9th, 10th round and confidently starting him the weeks that he's available. And then if he gets hurt, you can drop him and kind of move on. Whereas best ball, it's, you're kind of taking those zeros. If he does get hurt, it's not a guarantee that he's going to get hurt again. But you kind of have to play that in. And then with RJ Harvey, I have a tough time seeing kind of the upside path. And since he's the top running back drafted here, I mostly avoided him. And as Jack alluded to, we're a bit behind Jonah Coleman, so I haven't had much of him either. So sadly, I don't have like a ton of exposure to this Broncos backfield. I think probably in redraft is hopefully where I'll get some more and think like Jonah Coleman is probably a better stash there as well. So at this point in time, don't have too much exposure there, but
it's
still
possible
a couple
Coleman's
months
just
left.
I mean, he's a day 3 rookie. It's possible he's just not good enough. You know, I said the Javonte role. Maybe he's nowhere near what Javonte is in some of these different areas. It just that's what his profile is. It's why you would go draft him, especially after the way last year went when Dobbins was out and you didn't have. I mean, you had Harvey and like Jaleel McLaughlin. Like they didn't have the answers to do the different things in the different phases and all the rotational stuff that Peyton likes. Now these are 3 very different backs is the way I'm looking at it in terms of how I think he wants to use them. It reminds me a lot of that 10-year ago Saints team, but it's not the way that he's done it every year of his career or anything, Peyton as a coach. And then health and development are huge elements here, right? It's always different personnel. You got an old injured back and you got 2 young guys that we don't even know what they are. It's kind of tricky because Harvey, I don't think we really have any idea what he's going to be. I mean, I think he could still develop. He's an older prospect. I think there's real concern that he's like not a good enough runner. He came from a smaller school. I mean, UCF's in the Big 12 now. It's not like a super small school or anything, but you have some concerns that his collegiate profile was more just boom bust rushing and won't translate. Although, I mean, it's a rookie year. I mean, if he's a boom bust runner and he starts hitting on more booms, then you start to think that he's a good runner, you know, like it's the whole thing's tricky.
Yeah, and just logically, you know, you laid it out. The offseason moves just kind of indicate that they don't feel great if Dobbins went down, having RJ Harvey as a starting rusher. That doesn't mean Jonah Coleman is going to be capable of doing it though. So for sure, you know, there's a lot of potential different outcomes here. Let's head to the wide receiver room here, though. It is another pretty convoluted spot just in terms of the Broncos rotated wide receivers a ton last year. Cortland Sutton was easily the team lead at 83% of routes. Troy Franklin was second at 64%, but he only had 44% routes in his last 4 games. Marvin Mims was 45% route share on the season, but 59% in the last 4 games. And then we have Pat Bryant at 42.5% on the season, but he has pretty wide splits between kind of the first half and second half of the year. So and then they acquire Jalen Waddle this offseason. So I think my big question for you, Jack, is do you think that Jalen Waddle and Cortland Sutton, are they able to consolidate routes here and become like the firm top 2 wide receivers, or do you think this rotation will continue and we kind of see, you know, guys rotated in the wide receiver 3 and 4 spots, or do you and like the top 2 are safe and Waddle and Sutton, or do you think there's any threat to those top 2 guys routes just given the way the rotation has gone here in previous years?
I personally think that they're pretty safe here. I mean, Denver gave up a ton for Jalen Waddle. They gave up a first and a third. All the reports all offseason have been that he's been awesome throughout their offseason program. He's averaged at least 9 yards per target in 4 straight seasons. That's pretty incredible, especially given how inept the Dolphins were offensively last year. I think Waddle's going to walk in and be the wide receiver 1 here. Us and Gretch both have it that way. Gretch is even higher on Waddle than us relatively. He's 22 targets ahead, 22 targets higher than us on Waddle, and only 7 targets higher on Sutton. So I think that those 2 are going to consolidate snaps and routes a bit, and then it's going to get even trickier with the rest of their receiving group, because I do think they still want to rotate guys after that, but they now have Pat Bryant, they still have Marvin Mims in that wide receiver 4 rotational role, and they still have Troy Franklin. And now if you have 2 guys up top who have really consolidated routes into an every down role, you've got 3 guys now gunning for really 1 spot at receiver.
Yeah, and we have Jalen Waddle pretty much right at market right now. You know, 1 spot behind on Underdog, and then Cortland Sutton we're a little bit ahead, and then no wide receiver gets drafted until Pat Bryant he's around 210 ADP on Underdog. We're about 20 spots ahead there, and so I was interested to see, you know, where Gretch landed on kind of like the wide receiver 3 role here, because we are a little bit off market in that we think Pat Bryant is kind of the clear favorite to be the wide receiver 3 here, but you do have Troy Franklin, who, you know, in his age 22 season posted 700 yards and 6 touchdowns, had over 100 targets, which I think if you told people Troy Franklin had over 100 targets last year, they'd be surprised. You know, it wasn't an efficient 100 targets, only 6.2 yards per target there. And again, his routes did dwindle towards the end of the season. So, you know,
yeah, that's the part of it that I think is really interesting. He's kind of on a downward trajectory. I'm reading it as like he seemed to have missed his moment a little bit. They were giving him a real role most of the year. He was losing routes late in the year. As I was writing up the Knicks stuff, one of the things I said is like, you can't blame one receiver for the inefficiency, but like when I go through the projections and I reduce Franklin's role a lot, it helps Nick's efficiency, because Franklin was very inefficient. He was very poor last year. There was one game where he had like 10 targets and like 2 catches for 8 yards or something. There was he had some other good games as well, but the fact that he was losing routes late in the year, after he had consolidated those number 2 routes, I think is a pretty big concern. Bryant was really on an upward trajectory, and especially in the 2 playoff games, they seemed to really want to be unleashing him. He got hurt with a concussion in the first, came back, and then hurt his hamstring in the second. Both of them right away. He only played 12 snaps in the 2 games, had 5 offensive touches in those 12 snaps. In the one game, they gave him like 3 quick screens right away, and then he was knocked out of the game on the third one. The other one, he had 2 touches right away. I think it's pretty clear that Bryant was the guy. He was on the more like traditional routes trajectory for a rookie. He was at like 40% or whatever early on. Then he was in like the 60% range the next segment of the year. And then late in the year was able to actually get his routes a little higher. He went over 50% for the first time in week 5. Then he was between 40 and 60% for 5 weeks. Then he went over 70% for the first time in week 10, and he was over 60% in every healthy game the rest of the way from there. That's what I have in my notes. So anyway, it's sort of that, trajectory, upward trajectory of the rookie gaining routes as it goes. And if you're looking ahead to next year, I'm glad that you guys have it the way I do. I thought I was a little bit out of line as well, but we are in lockstep that Pat Bryant is the guy that seems to be moving forward. They were talking about him in sort of that Sutton role. And I do see him as a bit of a threat to Sutton as well, in addition to everything Jack said, which I agree with about Waddle. I'm excited about Waddle. Waddle's a limited routes guy at times. In his Dolphins tenure, he left the field at times, a little banged up, this and that. We know Sean Payton likes to do the rotational stuff and limit some of the routes anyway. A highly efficient per route guy with limited routes, meaning a coach who's actually really good at getting a lot of efficiency per route because he uses players like to their strengths. Like we had the Marvin Mims year a couple years ago where he had like a 2.5, yards per route run. I feel like the efficiency could really pop for Waddle here on a per route basis, even though I don't expect his route. Counterintuitively, I do think his routes could actually rise a little bit as well because of all the, from his Miami stuff, because he's been banged up and because of all the draft capital they gave up that Jack said. But I even if they don't rise in a massive way, I do think you could see Waddle improve from the per route efficiency element and all that stuff. Sutton is still probably the role in the offense that is going to get more routes and all of that stuff, but his yards per out run dipped last year. 2024 was a little bit of a spike year, and then 2025 looked like 2023 and earlier. And so you get to this thing where it's like probably 2024 was just a spike season. He's now in age 31, more routes dependent. I have him as like a small hit, big miss kind of a fade, where Pat Bryant is sort of in his rearview mirror as well, because we've talked about him in that X receiver role a long time. Right when he was drafted, Sean Payton was comparing him to Michael Thomas to go make another drawback to his Saints tenure. And so I'm with you guys. I like Pat Bryant a lot as the sort of the wide receiver 3, but they're all going to have roles. Marvin Mims is going to have a role. I mean, I think we know he's probably not going to consolidate routes at this point of his career, but that's the other thing. Mims is 4 years in, Franklin's 3 years in. Bryant in year 2 is the one that I think you have that potential for what Troy Franklin got in year 2 last year, which is you're still on the ascendancy.
Yeah, I strongly agree with you on the Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin thing. That's something we've been above market on Bryant all offseason and low on Franklin. And Underdog actually has Franklin ahead in ADP, which I think is kind of shocking, to be honest. I mean, it's like the lowest stakes thing in the world. They're both going around pick 209. We think Waddle and Sutton are going to be the clear top 2 wide receivers. So it probably won't really matter, but I think Troy Franklin is like on real
it's
danger
crazy.
watch. As like
Pat Bryant should be drafted in every draft. He doesn't even get drafted in some.
Yeah, I think Troy Franklin's career is on like pretty real danger watch. After Denver's bye week, Brian outrouted him 36-30 in week 13, 27-16 in week 14, didn't play week 15. And then Franklin was ahead in week 16, 35-30, but Brian was carted off with an injury. And then there were just so many games, like you mentioned, both playoff games, he left early with an injury, which I think really obscured the fact that he was the very clear wide receiver 2 over Franklin to end the year. The issue is that Marvin Mims is still going to be in that rotational 40% of snaps role. So it's not like Bryant, in my opinion, has like a clear path to an 80% snap and route rate without an injury to Waddle or Sutton.
Yeah,
but
it's a Sutton injury or a Sutton like decline to such a degree that somehow he's. I mean, that's the only path. But
I think Bryant is exceedingly clearly the wide receiver 3. Mims is going to be in the same role as the wide receiver 4, and then Franklin really needs to show that he can stick in the NFL if he wants to be on the team next year.
Yeah, it seems like Pat Bryant is a great best ball pick. Probably more so than redraft at this point, just because you do kind of you don't have to worry about when the spike weeks are going to come for Pat Bryant and in best ball. If we're confident he's in the wide receiver 3 role and not getting drafted in every league, then I think that is a great end around target or end of draft target, and I think we'll continue to be well above market there on him, hopefully.
But I mean, the wide receiver 3, just a very minor point of clarification. The wide receiver 3, like Jack was saying it too, it's not maybe the best way. It's like the best third wide receiver bet, but like Franklin and Mims are still going to run routes is the thing. They're going to have 5 guys running routes. Like that's like at wide receiver alone. Like they're going to have a ton of dudes running routes.
Let's head to tight end here. Another room where you get some decent mixing and matching here. You have Evan Ingram as the quote unquote starter, but Adam Troutman from week 8 on, played more snaps than Ingram in every single week there. So Evan Ingram was more so just like a trailing game script player for the Broncos. So I think, with the Broncos expected to be a strong team, we could probably, almost project Adam Troutman for more snaps, but that does not lead to targets there for Troutman necessarily. So kind of almost like a black hole at the fantasy tight end position here for the Broncos, despite all of the offseason talk last year of can Evan Ingram be the Joker. I think that that question was answered, in pretty negative light towards the end of last year. But in terms of projections here, we have 52 targets on Evan Ingram. Gretch a little bit higher at 69. Gretch, is Ingram a guy you're holding on hope for at all, or is this just kind of a spot to avoid, you think, in fantasy?
I think it's a spot to avoid. He had 76 targets last year. It's another one of those ones where like I was declining it and not sure how far to decline it. It's always funny when I wind up like higher. This reminds me of all the years of me like somehow winding up higher than Leone on Adam Thielen and then him giving me crap. But in my little write-up, I do the signal and noise. I called Evan Ingram noise, and specifically I wrote the idea that he's a lead tight end or a fantasy play, which is like the noise element of it. It's just what you said. He's 32. He looks very likely to remain in rotation. Adam Troutman got a new multi-year deal. They also drafted 2 new tight ends that are both kind of interesting prospects. And Justin Jolly and Dallin Bentley, I think is the name. They're pretty clearly signaling that they don't love Evan Ingram when they sign Troutman to this big deal and then go acquire a couple more tight ends. I think we're going to see a rotation at tight end, just like we will at some of the other positions. I know we did the running backs a ton. We got to move on. The 2 things that I was seeing in my notes that I wanted to mention on Dobbins, I do think, like we just talked about him like he's going to get hurt. I do think this idea that he's like old and broken down is overplayed. He was so efficient last year. There are the trap concerns we talked about. Like he doesn't get enough receptions. He didn't get enough like goal line work, but I think he's like a pretty good play in like 0.5 PPR, like underdog, if he does stay healthy. And then on Harvey, I mean, guy still had 47 receptions last year, despite the limited role. So as far as the intent, I don't know if we threw out the real number on that, but the ball in hand stuff there was intent there for sure. So anyway, I guess not that gave me any clear answer on how to play these guys, but I did want to mention those 2 little notes.
Absolutely. Let's move along to the Chargers here, though. Big news is that Mike McDaniel is coming over as head coach of the Dolphins to be the new offensive coordinator and play caller here for Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Very exciting move here. In fantasy, Mike McDaniel has led some of the most fantasy friendly offenses in Miami there with Jalen Waddle, who you just discussed, and Tyreek Hill, obviously Devon Achane, McDaniel products. So I think people are extremely excited about this Chargers offense and rightfully so. Just some team level notes here. I did get some notes from Pat Thorman, who is our great pace and plays expert at Established to Run. He gave me some notes on kind of McDaniel. So I did want to run through that a little bit before we get into the team level inputs we have here. But he has notes here that Miami's contests ranked 22nd, 25th, and 32nd in combined play volume with McDaniel there. And then the Dolphins, as a result, finished 10th, 21st, 25th, and 31st in offensive snaps per game. Mentions that McDaniel loves the pre-snap motion and for good reason, but it also burns clocks, and the Dolphins finished first, and second in motion rate during his time with Miami. So, he comes to the Chargers. We're expecting probably a bit of a slower offense, but highly efficient here. In terms of the plays per game projection at ETR, we are at 61.7. Gretch is at 62.8. There we're about equal on the called pass rate. We're at 60.7%. Gretch at 60.4%. 0.5% there. So I think we're expecting we have their plays per game middle of the league at 14th overall right now, and their pass rate also at 14th. So with those notes from Thorman that we have, Gretch, how are you expecting Mike McDaniel to impact this Chargers offense and play calling this upcoming season?
Yeah, I saw Pat's been tweeting some of those, so I saw some of his notes on Twitter as well, and he's obviously the pace goat. We're excited to get the his full snaps and pace full season breakdown here pretty soon. I hear it's a little birdie, a couple birdies. You guys are telling me that it's coming soon enough. Maybe we'll have it by the end of this series, but we don't have it quite yet. Excited for that. Pat's the goat at this stuff. The one thing I will note is last year they were still up near the top of the league in play volume in the Chargers were, despite being slow paced. So he had noted as well that the Chargers were slow paced as well. So you have Harbaugh coming in and slowing down the Chargers. After he took over, they were faster paced before Harbaugh, was something that Pat was mentioning. And then obviously what Mike McDaniel's done, the high rate of motion, all of these things are going to slow the Chargers pace on offense, but good teams run more plays. And they still did manage to be third in raw play volume last year, despite being bottom 10 in pace in LA. And one of the really interesting things about LA last year was that Jim Harbaugh, they came out throwing. It was very surprising. Even under Greg Roman, it seemed like they really wanted to let Herbert win these games for them, which I think is commendable. And he played really well. And then late in the year, they have all these offensive line injuries. And at times Herbert looks like a guy who's forcing it, not really in a bad way, just because like that's what he was. They were asking him to try to win these games for him. They finished 8th highest in pass rate over expected. Miami during the earlier McDaniel years were a decently pass leaning team, not so much in the later years. But as we get McDaniel coming into LA with kind of a little something to prove, and we get this element of, it's a little bit more narrative based, but we get this element as well on the Harbaugh and Herbert side that last year they kind of wanted to get after it seemed like, and then they had all these offensive line injuries and it became tough. I do think they're going to be slow paced. I do think the marriage of McDaniel and Harbaugh is going to lead to a deliberate offensive tempo, but I also think they're going to be good. And I think they're going to be, one of the other things with the McDaniel play volume stuff is that they were really efficient sometimes. And so you get that element of the efficiency drives down play volume. In some ways, I'm definitely concerned about play volume a little bit, but in some ways I'm not trying to overplay it too much because I do really like this offense and I don't want to overplay in a way that's like, okay, yeah, I mean, if their play volume's low because they're scoring a lot of touchdowns, then that's going to be fine. Like, because they're moving the ball, they're getting chunk gains, those things, and that's going to be fine. If they're not getting those chunk gains, I guess I expect them to have the ball enough as a winning team to still be decent in play volume. I'm not projecting them particularly way above average, but I am still projecting them above average in play volume, despite these, very clear pace concerns. But the way that I'm viewing it, to Pat's note, is really just an acknowledgement that the range of outcomes is worse than it feels on paper, and I may be too optimistic with my play volume.
Yeah, and to the offensive line injury point, Rashawn Slater got hurt before the season, so did not play a single snap for the Chargers last year. And then Joe Alt played the first 4 weeks, got hurt, came back and played a couple games. So he ended up only playing 6 games for the Chargers. But in those 6 games, 5 of them were a positive pass rate over expectation, including 4 of their 5 highest marks on the overall season came with Joe Alt healthy. So, with Slater and Alt projected to be back, we could see, I think, that pass rate probably elevates even or continue to be high, just given Justin Herbert's talent and kind of some of the offseason coach week we've gotten from Mike McDaniel there on wanting to lean into Justin Herbert and just kind of have like career years for him and the coinciding wide receivers here. Jack, let's talk through Justin Herbert specifically. Last year he had 31 rush yards per game, had never been over 18 in his career, so that was a big jump up from him and his fantasy production. But he also took 54 sacks, so tons of sacks and scrambles last year. I think drove down Herbert's or pass volume quite a bit there. His 54 sacks last year, easily a career high, I think can be summed up to losing both starting tackles as well as some just not great play along the interior of their offensive line. But in terms of Justin Herbert, I was looking at this. It's been kind of like a tale of 2 careers for him in terms of pass volume from 2022 from 2020 to 2022. His 17-game average was 682 pass attempts, nearly 4,900 yards, 33 touchdowns. And in the last 3 seasons, that's been like 544 attempts, under 4,000 yards and around 25 and a half passing touchdowns for Herbert. So his fantasy value has declined a little bit here. Do you think this is a good setup for him to rebound, and just thoughts on his fit in this McDaniel scheme?
I think it's a good setup for Herbert for sure. I think the main question is how much exactly do we expect the efficiency to increase? I think Tua led the league in yards per attempt in 2022 under McDaniel. His yards per attempt decreased every year as he progressively turned more and more into a pumpkin. But Herbert has plenty of room for his efficiency to increase. He was only at 7.3 yards per attempt last year. We are projecting 7.4. Gretch is at 7.6. We've talked on some of the earlier pods about how Gretch naturally comes in higher on yards per attempt, projecting more wide receiver health, which flows through to the quarterback. But I do think that it's worth talking about here. If Herbert can get up to like the 7.8 to 8.0 range, which seems within the realm of possibilities with McDaniel, that has league-winning potential. The other thing is his touchdown rate. Gretch comes in 3 touchdowns higher than us. We're at a 5.1% touchdown rate, which is above his career average of 4.7%, but in line with what he had last year. So if the touchdown rate also spikes under McDaniel, there's certainly some upside from where we have him projected. Right now, we're a little bit below on Herbert versus market. The market is pretty aggressive, or at least optimistic, given the McDaniel hiring. But there's certainly room for the efficiency to skyrocket here.
And Tua's pass TD rate has always been a little bit higher than Herbert's, and that was something else I was looking at there. I do think they'll do some of the passing in the red zone. I mentioned the running back, the passes with intent. They did that a lot with Achane. I think we're going to see that with Keaton Mitchell, and as we work towards the running backs, I have way more targets than Keaton Mitchell. So I would probably need to sell you guys on this a little bit, but Keaton Mitchell is such an obvious fit as I went through this projection. I've been high on Keaton Mitchell all offseason. I had not thought about this until I went through the projection, but the Chargers have had really low running back target rates the last several years. And a lot of times that is the quarterback. Miami's had significantly higher, and it's certainly more of a Tua skill set. And I'm not pushing the running back target rate in my projection, to be clear, all the way up to Miami's degree, but I am increasing it significantly over the recent Chargers seasons. And I think that's because, so when they, some of the offseason talk has been that they've been talked about, some of the Mike McDaniel discussion has been about Justin Herbert's footwork, and specifically to get the ball to teammates as fast as possible. They're talking about getting the quick game ramped up. It's really interesting because that's stuff that McDaniel obviously did with Tua, and it was thought to be because it's Tua's skill set, but it seems like he does want to bring some of that over here. And you think about, like, who's that going to be? Maybe that's going to be Ladd. Maybe it's going to be QJ. Like, he's done some short ball and hand stuff, although mostly a vertical receiver. David Njoku's a guy who's done some of that. I think it's going to be the running backs, and I think it's going to be very beneficial to Amari and Hampton, but Keaton Mitchell is the obvious one, the super fast player. Apparently, Mike McDaniel put up wanted posters for Keaton Mitchell, and Alec Ingold is the other one, which is hilarious. But there was some reference about that McDaniel wanted to get Keaton Mitchell. They paid him to bring him in because he's so fast. He's also very much undersized. How do you use a guy like that? You try to get him into space. That's what they've done with Devon Achane a lot. Quick hitters and these like quick angle routes where they get the ball out and immediately into his hands in space as like a first read in the passing game. I think that probably is part of what happens with Mitchell. And then what it ties back to with Herbert is Tua's passing TD rate was really strong because of a high pass rate in the green zone. A lot of that was throwing to the running backs. HN would have a big receiving TD rate basically every season. Some of it was also some of the quick game stuff to like Jonnu Smith that one year. But it's using the quick game in the red zone in addition to running. They've also had their seasons, the year with Mostert and Achan's rookie year where Mostert had 20 TDs, Achan had like 11. They had 30-something running back touchdowns. Most of those were rushing. I do think they're going to run in the red zone as well. But this is an offense I think that's going to be good and score a lot of points. And I do think the Herbert pass TD rate that you were talking about, I think it could really spike because of some of that stuff, which is pretty exciting. You mentioned the O-line stuff. Obviously, both tackles were out last year. They get healthier. They draft a 4th-round depth tackle as well. They draft a 2nd-round guard. They draft 2 more interior linemen in the 6th. They also signed 2 more interior linemen. They really have taken depth on the offensive line seriously this offseason, which is another very positive thing. You talked about Herbert's sack rate being up the last couple of years. I brought a sack rate way back down in this new offense. His scramble rate was way higher starting last year, which is really interesting as well. I brought that down some, but left it up a little bit. Seems like something they wanted to do more of. Harbaugh talked about that, like wanting to let him impact the game with his athleticism a bit more. But I do think this offense is, with the quick game and stuff, is going to bring down some of Herbert's sacks and scrambles, both, and the offensive line improvements as well. So I'm pretty bullish on Herbert. I think the rushing is probably better than people realize. He was way up there. I think he was third in the league in running back or quarterback rushing yardage last year, if not like fourth or fifth, but very high. And even if that comes down a little, I still think that's good. And then the pass TD rate could be really high. This is a clear, like another clear, like could be QB spike season. People love him for the MVP bets and things, and I'm very much in on that.
Yeah. Last year, Herbert, 8.5% scramble rate, and he's still like a 5% career scramble guy. So certainly a pretty big departure there. I kind of think that was mostly due to, poor offensive line play and Herbert feeling like he needed to, escape and use his legs more as a weapon. I do think that is pretty likely to come down, but if it does stay in that 5 to 6% range, more so than, he's had some seasons like in the 3 to 4% range, which is pretty much adding, almost nothing per game scrambling. So hopefully it's somewhere in the middle there to keep up that level. Let's get into the backfield though, because I am really interested to hear your Keaton Mitchell like targets, projection take, because for inputs here on Marion Hampton at ETR, we're at 231 carries. Gretch is at 221. We are at 55 targets. Gretch at 51. So we are actually a little bit ahead of Hampton, which is interesting because we've been behind market in the best ball, all off season, which is just telling that Gretch is even a little bit below us on the inputs here. And meanwhile, on Keaton Mitchell, we're at about 79 rush attempts and 13 targets. Gretch is at 96 rush attempts and 40 targets. So about 3 times the amount of targets here. And I had written down in my notes for Keaton Mitchell, Gretch, kind of that term you had said on one of the earlier shows, like, is he a trap back? Is he going to only really get touches like between the 20s, and then Marion Hampton with the superior size is going to come in near the goal line? And then is Keaton Mitchell going to catch any passes? So I do want to toss it to you probably first before Jack discusses our inputs, mostly on the Keaton Mitchell receiving game and what makes you bullish that he's going to inherit that role here in McDaniel's offense.
Well, yeah, I just shared some of it, but like last year they only had 74 running back targets in this offense. The year prior they had 59. It's been very low. There was like 5 running backs with 85 plus around the NFL last year targets individually, and Devon Achane was one of them. He's obviously, and some of that's Achane's skill set, of course, and the fact that they didn't have as much depth at receiver and tight end. And that's one of the things we'll talk about with the concentration. That's been a big thing with McDaniel's offenses in the past, is concentration. I do think you have to recognize that there's a lot more depth in this offense at running back, at wide receiver, and at tight end than any of the Miami offenses. Like, they've got a better, probably number 3 running back than Miami had as a number 2 some of those years. They've got deeper wide receivers, no doubt, and they've got deeper tight ends behind, Gadsden and Njoku, and they even signed Charlie Kohler to a nice deal. So there's a lot more depth in this offense. That said, at least 114 running back targets 3 years straight in McDaniel offenses in Miami is a lot more, 114, than the 74 and 59 here for the Chargers last year. I was looking at sort of where they go. I have 50 plus for Hampton, but I have 40 projected here for Mitchell, and it is that stuff that it's feel like, again, it's like he's small, he's extremely fast. It's the idea of using him in space, stuff like those angle routes, and then also the quick hitters. Like, they would split a running back out and throw to Achane on the edge. It's not an easy thing to like counteract defensively. If you just like put a guy way up on the line, then they throw deep. Like, that's they can fake that. And so that's why part of why Achane had so many receptions over the last couple of years with the Dolphins. And I do think that's going to be a part of the offense here, and particularly when Mitchell's on the field, rather than just running him into the line every time when he's 170-pound back. I do think part of that makes sense. Again, some of it's Achane's skill set, but they got dynamic running backs here too, and I think they're going to do that with Hampton and Mitchell.
Yeah, I had kind of mostly attributed the Achane target share just to his specific talent, and then kind of the lack of other target options in Miami, especially after Tyreek went down, and we have seen Achane's targets just really spike when they were Johnny Smith, Jalen Waddle, or Tyreek were really out. So Gretch mentioned it's a very interesting needle to thread here in fantasy, because again, we have some questions about the play volume just given McDaniel's history, and then we do have a ton of targets here in the offense, or a bunch of talents to distribute touches here. So Jack Hampton, let's kind of dive in on him a little bit, because he's someone, again, we've been behind market on, and it's not that we don't like Marion Hampton. We have as the 19th overall player in half PPR right now. He's just going really high at 15 ADP right now on Underdog. Curious your thoughts on this backfield split, and if you're targeting any Chargers back so far this offseason.
Yeah, I think that was a good point that Gretch just made, and it makes me think that after this show, we should probably revisit our running back target stuff, because we only have 15.5% target share, actually 16%. We have 0.5 for Jarrett Patterson allocated to running backs. And we're kind of projecting Keaton based on what he's done in the past, but it is a good point that McDaniel is likely going to be more imaginative with him than what he had. I do think it'll be interesting who actually plays on pass downs here, because Baltimore never used Keaton Mitchell in that way. They even used Rashee Ali over him down the stretch last year on pass downs. But on Hampton, he was pretty good as a rookie. 0.66 rush yards over expected per attempt, first round draft capital, upgraded offense, and that kind of makes it a scary bet to be below market on, but we are below market on him right now, and Gretch is even lower than us, just because they do have three guys who need volume. They prioritize Keaton Mitchell this offseason. I was really curious where Gretch was going to come in on the rushing split here, and I'm not overly surprised, given I expected him to be higher on Keaton Mitchell, but a little bit surprised that we come in higher on Hampton, and it does make me feel better about our Hampton fade, because I do think the split in terms of rush attempts is a little bit uncertain with the three backs that they have.
So this isn't going to help anything, but my number one note on my running back line here is the running back rushing split feels really tough to dial in. And then I think Hampton's a good pick. So yeah. I think my projection comes in probably a little bit too light, but I think it's challenging to get the projection right. One of the notes I had is I think they'll have real intent to use Vidal, but ultimately won't really be able to find enough work for him if Amarian and Keaton are healthy, because I think those two guys are just a lot better. One of the reasons I gave him a little bit more rush attempt stuff than I wanted is I was like, I think when they win games and they blow teams out, because I think they're going to be good, I think it might make sense for them to use Kamani Vidal and use Amarian Hampton, or cut Amarian Hampton back a little bit. So some of the late game stuff, he may not just compile extra rushing work. There's going to be a little bit of a rotation. And then I do think Keaton Mitchell's going to have a real role. They gave him a really solid contract, and they've talked a lot about him. And it's something that McDaniel's always wanted to feature, is speed like this in his offense. So I do think there's going to be a real role there. But I mean, Hampton had a really good, you mentioned the rush yards are expected, but meaningfully better yards per carry, evasion metrics, yards after contact, and breakaway run rate than Vidal in the same offense. Some people have detracted from Hampton and talked about he only was good against certain offenses or defenses or something. I have a really hard time seeing this as a failure of a rookie year, especially because he was playing through an injury. I think he was good prospect profile, and now he's in a new, very exciting offense. I want to be in on the tail outcomes for Marion Hampton.
We've tried to bump, or we have bumped our Marion Hampton's efficiency from Algo as well here, just for the Mike McDaniel effect, and agree with Gretch. He did perform well as a rookie. So again, certainly a scary fade there, but man, it's gonna be interesting to see who ends up the big winners from this Chargers offense, because I do think there are gonna be some in fantasy, but again, kind of more mouths and more players that it could land on compared to Miami, where we've seen McDaniel in the past. Let's go to the wide receiver room here, headlined by Ladd McConkey, entering his third season, kind of a tale of two seasons. One of the best rookie wide receiver seasons we've had in the last handful for Ladd McConkey, especially down the stretch there. Really efficient rookie season, and that got dialed back in his second year, largely due to Keenan Allen, I think, coming in, but only a 19% target per out run for Ladd McConkey in the sophomore season. Certainly a big disappointment. We also have Quentin Johnston coming into his fourth year, which is pretty wild. But these are likely to be, especially with the tight end signings here. Should mention, they bring in Charlie Kolar on a 3-year, $24 million deal to sign David Njoku to a contract as well. So maybe some heavier personnel tendencies for the Chargers incoming. We can talk through that a little bit, but let's talk through Ladd and QJ first up top, Jack, as we expect those to be the top two wide receivers here in terms of target For Lad, we are at 112. Gretch is at 119. On QJ, we're at 91, and Gretch is at 82. Gretch actually has 82 targets on Trey Harris as well. So basically splitting the QJ and Trey Harris targets there evenly. We had kind of tilted that way a little bit, and then the market has really started to steam up on Quentin Johnston, especially in best ball. We've fallen like 30 picks behind. So that's kind of a spot we've oscillated back and forth between. Jack, how do you expect this wide receiver room to play out here under Mike McDaniel?
Yeah, QJ, we are slightly low because the market has really come around on him. I think Levitan tweeted out this past weekend that his ADP has steamed multiple rounds without a whole lot of news. I know Daniel Popper over at The Athletic did say that he was going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the McDaniel offense with his yak ability. So I guess that's a small piece of news, but not something that should bump his ADP as much as it has. To QJ's credit, he has gotten significantly better throughout his NFL career. 20% target share in 2024, 18% last year. His yards per target has jumped at least 1 yard in each season of his career and back-to-back seasons with 8 touchdowns. So I think that we're kind of giving QJ a little bit of credit for improving their lack of wide receiver moves this offseason. I think display some level of trust in QJ as their wide receiver too. And then Lad, like you said, I think we can expect the target share to jump back up. Keenan Allen led the team in target share last year. He was at 0.27 targets per route run. So vacating those targets, Keenan Allen obviously still a free agent, assuming that they don't re-sign him and really crush everyone here. I think we can expect Lad to jump back up. I am curious to hear Gretch's Trey Harris standpoint, because we have him as the clear wide receiver 3. Harbaugh has referred to having 3 elite wide receivers, with Trey Harris being the 3rd. So I certainly think that they have a lot of trust in Trey Harris going into year 2 down the stretch. They were playing him a decent amount of snaps, using him as a blocker. So I think that they trust him in that regard as well. But they do have 3 tight ends that they are going to use. They also have Alec Ingold at fullback. So I do think that there's going to be a decent amount of plays where they don't have 3 receivers on the field. So I want to hear kind of the Trey Harris bull case, because Gretch has him even with QJ. I kind of lean toward QJ, just given the improvements that he's shown over the past 3 seasons.
I would probably take some exception to the idea of improvement, other than the idea that he was incredibly poor early in his career. I mean, 2023, he was a sub 1 yards per out run guy. 2024, he got it up to 1.77. And then last year was back down to 1.51. You mentioned the yards per target has improved. The target rate went back down last year. He started off really hot last year. It was 70 plus yards in each of the first 4 games and 4 TDs in that span. From that point forward, across 11 more games, including their postseason game, he went for more than 53 yards just 2 times. He had 30 or fewer yards 6 times. He only had 4 more total TDs. We've talked about the idea of the primacy effect in the past. It happens a lot in fantasy football. Guy has a big first month and people rethink his whole season way better than it was. Quentin Johnston had 55 catches for 711 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2024. Last year, he had 51 for 735 and 8 touchdowns. Basically the exact same line. 1 less game, I will note. He only played 14 games. But yeah, he had that really hot start and basically the same line. Going into 2025, he was a double-digit round guy. Going into 2026, people want to take him in like the 5th. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me, honestly. There's been improvement. One of the big issues in 2024 was his contested catch rate was one of the worst in the league. For a guy who's so big and fast, it's never made sense that he can't win contested catches. That's what he should be doing, like at a high rate. It did improve a little bit last year. It was below average, but it was better. They've come in, they've said nothing but positive stuff about QJ. McDaniel's compared his physical traits to Julio Jones and Andre Johnson, who he's had in the past. Although that's not really in dispute. That is not the issue with Quentin Johnston. He's not as skilled as those guys, period. Like, it's not in question. The skill that it takes to be a wide receiver, he does not have on their level, even if he has improved, if you're more on Jack's point on that. But Trey Harris is a very efficient player in college, was efficient last year. Catch rate's not like the number that you want to look at, but his catch rate last year was 70%, a little bit of a lower ADOT than Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston has drops even on the short passes. If you watch his games, Quentin Johnston's basically had a catch rate all 3 years right around 60%, like a 10% gap. And that's like the logical range. Like 70% is really high. 60% is more low. because, there's going to be a lot of catches that are, more or less easy to make and some that are going to be very difficult to make. And most guys are going to be in the 60s somewhere. It's a pretty big gap. It's not the only element. And Harris, there's other things that Harris, isn't going to be able to do, isn't going to have as much ball in hand probably as Quentin Johnston and some of that stuff. It does seem like McDaniel wants to feature him, and he does feature rare talents like Quentin Johnston. So I feel like I might be pretty wrong here, but my take on him is he's just a pretty limited player. I also think he's going to be involved, but without a huge ceiling. And to me, it makes like that take makes the whole passing game a bit frustrating by splitting the production up a little bit. But Trey Harris going into year 2 was getting, is a little bit like the Pat Bryant thing, was getting used late in the year, developed a 13 personnel, 1 wide receiver role. They used him in that role. They've talked him up all off season. Again, had a very productive college profile, and some called it gimmicky, but it's like astronomical production. Even if you consider that gimmick, like he had a 5+ yards per out run in his final season. Like if you consider that gimmicky, you can give him twice as many routes and give him 0 catches on all those, and it's still a 2.5 yards per out run. Like there's production. He's obviously able to catch the ball and score touchdowns and those things. And Quentin Johnston had production in his collegiate profile as well. But I just kind of think going into year 2, Trey Harris can take a step forward and be closer to Quentin Johnston in skill set than I think people realize. They've talked about this offseason like Ladd, Quentin Johnston, and Trey Harris are the 3 guys. That's what the way that I'm reading a lot of the team quotes is like they see these 3 dudes as the bulk of the passing game. Even Gadsden to me has not been talked about much this offseason, feels like a little bit of an afterthought. And I was interested to see here that you guys even have Gadsden lower than me. So you're thinking the same thing from that perspective of it. Which, you add in Njoku and all those things, it's going to get tight somewhere. And I kind of think that Gadsden's the guy that gets squeezed. I'm projecting him for fewer targets than he got last year. You guys are projecting him 11 fewer than me. So, I mean, you guys are seeing the same squeezing as well going into year 2 for a guy who had a good rookie year, but he's a tight end, probably a limited role when you have these receivers. But yeah, as far as the receivers are concerned, the Quentin Johnston, I mean, the hype has been confusing to me the whole offseason. I got to be honest. Like, it has not made sense that he basically had the same year as 2024 and was worse down the stretch, was losing routes, like was generally just not even playing as much, in addition to not getting the yardage or the touchdowns or anything as that first month where everyone is really, I think remember, not saying Jack, but I think the market is. And that's the part to me that's, I don't know. I think McDaniel likes him, but like, what do we think the upside is here?
Well, yeah, I think the fact that we're ahead of you on QJ inputs wise and still like well behind the best ball market is probably kind of like a good indication that being low QJ is where we want to be this offseason, especially, Trey Harris, second round pick, 55th overall. I think Gretch laid out a kind of a great campaign for him to take a step forward in year 2, especially. I think he is viewed as a better blocking wide receiver, and we know compared to Quentin Johnston, and we know that Mike McDaniel is going to value that in the run game as well. So, I think we don't necessarily have to bury QJ, but I think being below market is probably where we'll continue to be there. They also drafted Brennan Thompson, who's a 5'9", 165-pound rookie who ran a 4.26 40-yard dash. So I think when you think Mike McDaniel, we think speed and QJ is going to be able to continue to rip off these big plays and touchdowns and everything. Maybe Brennan Thompson could even take kind of like that speed role from him a little bit too. If that was a guy like on draft night, McDaniel's like begging for them to draft Brennan Thompson kind of thing. So multiple avenues where QJ's playing time could potentially get eaten into. But before we move to tight ends here, Gretch, I do want to get your kind of take on Ladd McConkey just after like the volatile, year 1 breakout to year 2 kind of decline. Again, only a 19% target per out run last year. Do you have any concerns over this profile heading into year 3, or, because he's going at the end of round 3 right now in draft. So the fantasy market is fully buying back into Ladd McConkey being like the clear wide receiver 1 here.
Yeah, he's tricky. I mean, his yards per target cratered last year. You mentioned that like some of it was Keenan Allen, and his target rate fell. His targets per out run fell, but his yards per target cratered as well. And so like there's a lot of different ways to get there with yards per target. Catch rate is going to be a big influencer of that. McConkey went from an incredibly high 73% catch rate as a rookie to 62% last year. I kind of feel like he was too efficient as a rookie, but over regressed last year. So the yards per target was over 10 as a rookie. It was 7.4 last year. I put it at 8.4. You guys have it at 8.7. It looks like we both expect him to actually, middle that basically, catch a few more balls, do a little bit more efficiently on the targets that he does see. Now, again, like catch rate is not like the most important stat. It's very relevant to ADOT and a lot of other things. And like I mentioned, like Trey Harris had a much higher catch rate. Part of the reason I was saying it that way is Harris was in a limited role. And to me, it's like he was able to succeed in the role that he was given. He brought in a lot of the passes that were thrown his way, but his yards per target were still meaningfully less than Quentin Johnston's, because Quentin Johnston last year was hitting on a lot of big plays. And I do recognize that. That's the other part of this for Ladd, is like he was not as productive with some of the big plays. His yards per reception came down just in the regular season. And then I know if we pulled the postseason data, it would be even more, because in 2024, he had the huge play in the postseason and the one huge game. But his yards per reception, 14 in 2024, down to 12 in 2025. So his catch rate drops a ton, but his yards per reception also falling. I mean, there's some real concerns there, but he was generally an efficient player in college. The issue with him was he didn't run a ton of routes, but on a per route basis, he was pretty darn good for Georgia, alongside Brock Bowers and alongside several other eventual NFL receivers like Adonai Mitchell and Jermaine Burton, and a lot of these guys who ended up transferring away from Georgia. Bowers always dominated those guys in production. He also kind of dominated McConkey, but McConkey was more of a, number one, never had to transfer away and seemed to be more productive than those guys at Georgia, kind of beat them out is my point, and was more of a routes-based thing where he was getting banged up a lot in college, but when he was out there, his per route profile was really strong. And it was both earning volume and efficient, the yards per target side of it. So I don't know. I don't know what it was about last year, but I'm definitely willing to be in on Ladd McConkey still, bouncing back. The tricky thing is, at his price, is the volume there, because we're both under 120 targets. People are really, really high on this offense, and I think rightfully so. But I do think it is going to be one that's deep and spread out. I think there's going to be stuff for Quentin Johnston, like I said, but I think that's going to just spread things out more. I think there's going to be stuff for Trey Harris. I think there's going to be stuff for the tight ends. I think there's going to be passing game stuff for the running backs in the quick game that I talked about. And I do think that just spreads a lot of stuff. Like, I want to play Herbert. I kind of want to play the running backs. I have a hard time with where to play the rest of it. Trey Harris is probably like the late round, cheap, interesting option of the pass catchers, but it's tricky.
Yeah, to the Ladd catch rate point, it did dip 11% from rookie season to sophomore season, when his ADOT was the exact same year over year. And then looking at kind of like the more advanced stuff, his yards after catch per reception was the exact same as well. So his yards before catch really took a dip, which to me, the data is indicating that he just did not hit nearly as often on kind of like the downfield explosive plays that he got in his rookie season. That kind of like evaporated a little bit in year two. So I do think that can rebound. And again, you mentioned efficiency wise, we're pretty much right in between like his rookie year and his sophomore season in terms of efficiency. So I think expecting that to balance that out is probably, the right way to think about it going into year three there for Ladd. All right. Tight end room here is another pretty tricky one to talk through, just because, Rondé Gadsden broke out as a rookie tight end, had 9.6 yards per target in his rookie season. Pretty much like tight ends, or George Kittle is pretty much the only other tight end that's up there in that efficiency realm for a tight end. Gadsden was, kind of a glorified big slot. He played 51% snaps in line last season. 47% were in the slot or out wide. Just turned 23 years old, but they do sign Charlie Kolar to a 3-year, $24 million contract. $17 million guaranteed there. And then they signed David Njoku as well. 1 year, up to $3 million deal, but only $850K guaranteed. David Njoku turns 30 this July. I'm like shocked that the market was not more in on David Njoku. I'm like really interested to see just what happens to him this season and the rest of his career. I cannot believe he, only got $850K guaranteed based on, what the tight end market has done this offseason. But I think it's a really tough projection to get playing time and routes split out here. So Jack, take us through this is a spot we've already tweaked a lot this offseason. What are your thoughts and notes kind of on this tight end room here?
Yeah, Gretch mentioned the start to the season that Quentin Johnston had. Gadsden had a similar sort of Linsanity run, only it was in week 6 to 11. He averaged 72 yards per game. And then over the final 6 games of his rookie year, he was only at 26 yards per game. And his snap and route numbers really decreased over that time as well. The calling card on him out of college was that he was a good pass catcher, but that there was some concerns about whether he could be an every down NFL tight end at his size. I think those concerns kind of came to fruition near the end of his rookie year. And I think the Chargers have kind of signaled that they they don't view him as their every down tight end with the moves they've made this offseason. They gave Kolar 3 years for $24 million. He's a good blocker. I think he's going to play a good amount. If we lump Alec Ingold in here as well, he has played at least 33% of snaps in 3 straight seasons as well as a fullback. Njoku was really bad down the stretch last year, only caught 5 balls over his final 4 games after Harold Fannin took the tight end 1 job, 6.1 and 5.2 yards per target over the past 2 seasons. And didn't get very much money, like you said. I kind of think that this tight end room is going to cannibalize itself and that there's not going to be anyone all that interesting. We're a little bit below market on Gadsden, but I do think it's fair to question the snap and the route ceiling here, even if he is the best pass catcher of the 3.
Completely agree. The Njoku, Levitan had a great tweet on Njoku I just pulled up from a couple of months ago, but he wrote, signs have been downright bad for Njoku, gets outplayed decisively by round 3 rookie Harold Fannin last year, yards per out run gone down each of the last 3 seasons, bottom out at 1.06 last year, gets very little interest on the open market despite a league-wide craze on tight ends because he didn't sign until much later than the normal free agent cycle, and then it settles for a 1-year deal worth up to $8 million. Only got $850,000 guaranteed on a team where he isn't the best blocking tight end, that's Kolar, and isn't the best receiving tight end, that's Gadsden. The one, like, if you want to be optimistic about Njoku, the one thing you can tell yourself is he's good at like the short catch and run stuff, the ball in hand stuff that like Jonnu Smith did a few years ago. But when I say that, people are gonna be like, "Oh, Jonnu Smith was a fantasy monster in this offense." He was a fantasy monster when they had no one else. This team we've been talking about has way too many other options. So it's not like they're gonna go. I mean, it's similar to that Sean Payton running back thing. Like you can't fit it right into the same role. You could say that Njoku could get some design targets or quick hitting targets, but it's going to be a very small sliver of the amount of work that Jonnu Smith got a few years ago. The upside comp for Gadsden for me in terms of usage is how McDaniel found a really good use for Darren Waller as soon as Waller got healthy in a way that he wasn't really using the other tight ends. It's like he had been waiting for Waller to get on the field, and then they were immediately using him sort of vertically. And Gadsden had a higher ADOT last year. His ADOT was actually more than double. Waller's ADOT was more than double Dulcich's in this offense. And Njoku would then be sort of what the Greg Dulcich was, which is Waller had an 11.9 ADOT, Dulcich had a 5.6. I do think that's probably how McDaniel's thinking about this, that Njoku's going to get some catches and some ball in hand stuff, but I mean like a low number. I have him projected for 37 targets. You guys have him at 42. We're thinking like 25 to 30 receptions on the season for Njoku as a rotational tight end at this point. And we've seen guys with high profiles go that direction. We've seen it with Noah Fant over the last few years in different offenses, former first round pick. We've seen it with Evan Ingram, we just talked about last year, was not really in that big of a role. He's got name value, but I don't think he's really that much of a threat. At the same time, Gadsden in a vertical wide receiver role on an offense that has 3 receivers they can use vertically is a little bit of a tricky one. And as Jack mentioned, his production tapered off as well. The other thing with the Charlie Kolar thing is they gave him a nice deal. He's just a blocking tight end, but he is a bit of a nuisance for Gadsden. He's got limited targets the last few years, but extremely efficient at a higher ADOT. He's been like this 9+ guy. They're not going to throw him a ton of targets, but they're going to leak him off the line in some of these 12 formations in vertical routes that would have otherwise probably gone to Gadsden. He's going to get like 15. I have him at 14 targets. You have him at 18, but that's like 15 targets that could have gone to Gadsden if Charlie Kolar wasn't on this offense. To Jack's point about the way the tight ends are going to rotate and some of those different things, there will be concepts that that Kolar is getting out vertically, and that's not good for Gadsden either. I really like Oronde Gadsden, the talent. I think long-term he's going to be a good player and all these things. He had a great rookie year. You got to like the upward trajectory going into year 2. I have him on like a dynasty best ball team. I'm excited about it. I'm just going to hold him and like see what happens with the rest of his career, but he's not a great best ball play in my opinion, because of these other tight ends behind him and then all of the wide receivers and just the way that this offense probably will run.
Yeah, and we've been a little bit behind Gadsden against the market, and even more like in redraft. I think it's going to be a tough thing to kind of nail down when you start Gadsden, unless there are a decent amount of injuries either in the tight end room or in the wide receiver core there to kind of open up some more playing time. All right, let's head to the Kansas City Chiefs here. It's wild talking about the Chiefs. I think third in a division, just given their dominance over the last half decade there with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Big news is Matt Nagy is out here, so Andy Reid will will become the head coach and play caller once again. They do return Eric Bieniemy to the coaching staff as well. He has called plays, I believe, a little bit in the past at points too. So maybe some interchangeable play calling duties there. But Andy Reid, the projected play caller for us as of right now in terms of team level inputs for the Chiefs at ETR, we are at 61.9 plays. Gretch is at 63.4. We're at 64.1% pass rate. Gretch is at 62.5%. So once again, Gretch a little bit higher on, or quite a bit higher on plays, 1.5 more plays there for the Chiefs. And then we are quite a bit higher on pass rate, 1.6% above there. The Chiefs did finish first in pass rate over expectation last year. We have them 10th in plays per game at 61.9. They finished 16th last year there. So Jack, we have, Patrick Mahomes coming back from this torn ACL and Andy Reid still at the helm here. What are your thoughts on this Chiefs play calling going into this upcoming season?
Yeah, the pass rate will be interesting now having Kenneth Walker in the fold. We're projecting it not quite to where they've been over the past 3 years, but closer to that, whereas Gretch, I think, is assuming more of a neutral tilt with Walker in the fold. And Brett Beach did say that they want to get the run game going a little bit more. They've been at least 64.3% in each of the last 3 years. So I'm interested in hearing this conversation, and I certainly think that there's a possibility we are not baking in the Kenneth Walker addition enough from a rush rate standpoint. And yeah, I do think that even with Bieniemy back, I know Matt Nagy was terrible, and I know that the offense literally did tank as soon as he became OC. I think they were top 2 in yards per play for 5 straight years under Bieniemy. Immediately became league average or worse under Nagy. But I do think that there's some really real personnel issues that they didn't address. And so I'm not totally assuming that just because Nagy's gone that all of a sudden this is going to be a really good offense again, even with the addition of Walker.
The pass rate stuff for me, this is another one where on a macro lens, I come in lower than I want to on the league wide trends. I come in with a heavier run lean because again, I'm expecting teams to be a little bit healthier. I'm projecting them that way. The pass heaviest teams every year are the teams that fall apart. Like the Cardinals went into the last year with Kyler Murray at quarterback, and then they wound up being the pass heaviest team with Jacoby Brissett. And their season, they went 3-14, and they fired everybody and they moved on. Like that's where you get the pass. So the league wide pass trends. I wind up more run heavy with my projections because I'm assuming this ideal utopia world for all the offenses. I do have them at plus 3.5% PROE relative to what my win total expected pass rate is. 62.5% pass rate for me is on the high end. I'm definitely with you guys that they're going to be a pass heavy team. I do have them leaning a little bit back, like into a reasonable range for the reasons you said. And Mahomes coming off an ACL. They're going to probably run a little more with a new running back. But yeah, they've been top 2 in PROE every year for like 7 straight years or something like that. I think since Mahomes took over. The one thing in addition, though, that I'm thinking about is they have the 10th most favorable schedule this year. They've like never had this. They've always played the hardest schedule in the league. It's like always been this thing where their win total over under to me has always been low. It'll come in at like 11.5 and the best teams will be 12.5. And everyone will say, well, they got the toughest schedule in the league. This was back. I remember when Brady was still in the league, they got the Bucs that year, and people were like, well, they got the Bucs on the NFC side, and they still got to play the Bills and the Ravens because every year they got to play the same. They got to play the Bills, the Ravens. I think they get the Bills again this year, but I don't think they get the Ravens maybe. But they get a third place schedule, so they have one of the more favorable schedules, probably the most favorable schedule they've had, like full stop in Mahomes' career. The other thing about the play volume, I want to know, their play volume cratered after Mahomes went out. With Mahomes, lowest single game was 57 plays. Without him, they had 2 games in 16 and 17 where they went for 42 and 43 plays. Through Mahomes' 14 games, they were averaging 65.3 plays. They finished at 62.4. It brought them down 3 plays per game. That 65 number was actually up from 2024. They were at 64.2. 63.8, 64.5 the prior years. So I've got them as like a 4-year trend of being at like 64-ish with Mahomes and then cratering when they gave up in week 16 and 17 last year. That's why I have them at 63.4, a little bit regressed off of that. You guys have them at 61.9. I know you guys are going with a little bit of a lower target, but that's one where I feel pretty good about my number. I think there's a little bit of the post Mahomes injury probably pulling your guys' algo down a little bit. I would like recommend like a little peek at maybe And then the offensive line is the other thing. Last year's first round pick, left tackle Josh Simmons, good in pass pro, but he missed some time. I think that's a good like year 2 upside bet that we think about in skill positions, but on the offensive line. There was a lot of people that really liked that pick for the Chiefs. They have Creed Humphrey as a high-end center. They don't have necessarily a great offensive line, but I do think those two could anchor like a solid unit. So I'm looking at this actually. I've kind of always been too high on the Chiefs throughout the Mahomes era, and they've not been that fun of an offense. I feel like they've been trying to add pieces to get back to where they were a little bit more explosive, like in the post-Tyreek Hill era, and it's never really happened. Last year is where it all fell apart. They lose Xavier Worthy right away. They already didn't have Rashee Rice. All these things didn't work out, and then eventually Mahomes gets injured late in the year. It's a little counterintuitive coming off of that year and coming off of Mahomes' injury, but like it really does feel like this might be the year where things actually come together in a way that I don't think people are really factoring in, because I do think the Ken Walker pick is pretty massive. I think their huge organizational failure the last several years has not been to get a difference-making running back when defenses have been doing the cover 2 stuff and the like more than anyone, the umbrella coverages and the safeties on the field. I think Pacheco has looked good at times because he's had space to run into. Now you add a running back with Walker's success, not lack of success rate, but boom bust ability, explosive ability to run into space, and you give him space. I think he may even be able to creep some guys down into the box and allow Mahomes to get some one-on-ones down the field that he's basically never had. Or if you don't do that, then I think Ken Walker is going to be a really successful runner in this offense because it's basically what he needs. If he bounces it outside, he'll have room to run. I don't think Isaiah Pacheco was particularly efficient with his movements either, but he often found space because that's the way the defenses play this offense. So anyway, I actually have like Mahomes' passing efficiency rebounding this year, coming off an ACL and some of those things, because I think having a competent running game sort of between the 20s is going to be really positive for the passing game off of that for the first time. That they haven't had that in years in my mind. I mean, they used Kareem Hunt for most of the year last year.
Absolutely. Let's get into the Mahomes efficiency though, because that was a spot when I was prepping for this. I was like, oh man, we have Mahomes for 6.8 yards per attempt and only project 229 pass yards per game. Like that seems way low for Patrick Mahomes, just given his career yardage outputs. He's never had a season below 245 passing yards per game. So I think we might be a little bit light on his efficiency, but it's not been great the last 3 years. He's been at 7.1, 6.8, and 7.0 yards per attempt. And then when you look at this receiving core, it's Rashee Rice, who is man, it's just really tough to trust him. You have Xavier Worthy, who had a down sophomore season, and it's like Tyquan Thornton as your wide receiver 3, who's an outcast from the team that drafted him in the Patriots. Cyrus Allen, like a 5th round pick, and then Kelsey in his age 36 season. So I have a tough time, thinking the efficiency necessarily rebounds a ton for Mahomes, but we are low here at 6.8 yards per attempt. Again, this flows from our pass catchers back to the quarterback. That's essentially how our yards per attempt is calculated here. So Jack, curious your thoughts on our Mahomes inputs. And I do want to mention too, just on the rushing side as well, before I let you take it over here, Jack. Last year, Mahomes had a career high with 422 rush yards and 5 touchdowns in just 14 games. He had an 8.9% scramble rate last season. That's like a top 5 mark in the league. His career is about 6.6%. So he was QB2 last season in fantasy points per game. The previous 2 seasons he was QB 11 in points per game, and that's where he's going this year. So yeah, Jack, any thoughts on this Patrick Mahomes efficiency input that we have?
Yeah, I was looking at the yards per attempt a little pre-show, and I'm with you in that I think I'm not optimistic that he's going to return to where he was, let's say, 4 years ago. But I do think that our 6.8 number could be a little bit low. That's even on the lower end of where he's been over the past 3 years. But the rushing efficiency, I think, is pretty massive for what we can expect from him from a fantasy standpoint. He was at 6.6 yards per attempt last year as a runner. He had 5 touchdowns on 64 carries. His scramble rate over the 4 years prior to 2025 was 6.8%. Last year was 8.9%. Now he's coming off a torn ACL. So I do think that the rushing, which really helped his fantasy value a ton last year, I do think that that's a pretty major question coming off the injury and just another year older. So I think that is going to have a big impact on what his end of season fantasy rank is what the rushing looks like post injury. But I do think that we could probably look into his yards per attempt and passing efficiency and maybe bump that up a little bit.
Gretch,
on the rushing stuff, my note was that I have a lower yards per carry and a lower rush TD rate, but not crazy lower because he plays how he plays. If he's out there, I do expect him moving around is kind of what I made a note to myself. And I think it's interesting because we are close in the rushing stuff. I'm not like way ahead of you guys at all. I have a little bit more on the rushing TD side. But Jack, you see that kind of really pulling down the overall value if the rushing is not there. I mean, I think that makes sense. Sorry, what were you going to ask, Mark?
I was just going to say you're 450 yards clear of us in projection on Mahomes passing yards, but we have the same like touchdown or the same touchdown projection. Despite that, we're at 29.5. You're at 29.3, and then I was just going to indicate we are pretty much in lockstep on the rushing projection, which I felt good about. We kind of docked it quite a bit just coming off the ACL and kind of the outlier season last year. So we are at 276 rushing yards projected on Mahomes. You're at 273, Gretch. So yeah, essentially in lockstep there, which I was happy to see.
Yeah, part of the and then I have the I have their pass TD rate. I had it ticking back up, but you guys have it even a little higher than me, which is interesting. But I basically have them. So you have Walker as a guy that I mentioned kind of the between the 20s thing, and I think he'll be great at that, but he struggled a little bit with the success rate stuff. Maybe he's not the ideal goal line back. They bring in Emery Demercado as the secondary back. Demercado's rate of carries from like the shotgun and was very high, and then against stack boxes very low. He's basically just a shotgun runner. There's some really interesting like efficiency stuff, but you do have to control for the fact that he's basically just a passing down back. They may use him differently, but I don't think he's like some star rusher. You have Brashard Smith in this backfield who had a 30% targets per route on just 108 routes, but every time they put him out there, they basically used him like this team used to use like a Jerick McKinnon or somebody. Like they tried to get him the ball in the pass game. And then they have the rookie Emmett Johnson, who's maybe the best backup to Kenneth Walker in terms of the actual early down rushing stuff. But the last time they had Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator, the running backs had 12 receiving TDs. This is back when they were doing a lot of the short passing by the goal line, and people would always talk about Mahomes' pass TD rate being like artificially juiced by the ways that they would do some of the shovel passes and trick plays. They got away from that a little bit the last couple of years under Nagy. They've only had 4 total running back touchdown receptions in the last 2 years under Nagy. In most of Bieniemy's other seasons, it was more like 4 or 5, but it kind of spiked. The other thing about the last time Bieniemy was there pre-Nagy was Mahomes led the league in passing yardage. It was I think his career high at like 5,200 passing yards in 2022. That's several years ago now, but I mean, there's a little bit of me that's like, now that he's coming off the ACL, now that he has a little bit more of an efficient run game, and also now that just Matt Nagy is not his offensive coordinator anymore, like maybe they're able to fix some of those things. Some of the yards per attempt stuff is well taken, but I also attribute to the volume of dropbacks where they ask him to throw into these obvious pass situations, and then sort of he has to take underneath throws or throw balls away at his volume more than other quarterbacks. I often see people compare Mahomes' per attempt efficiency to quarterbacks with vastly fewer dropbacks and be like, these guys are better than Patrick Mahomes. It's not how it works. The fact that Patrick Mahomes is dropping back against obvious pass coverages as much as he is the point. Can the offense be more functional overall in a way with a good running game in a way that improves Mahomes' efficiency? That's sort of my bet here, I guess. But that's the big question as well. I don't think it's a guarantee, but that's how I'm projecting it, is like the whole thing works better and there's fewer of these like really inefficient like dropbacks into obvious pass situations and throwaways and late game stuff that brings down the per attempt efficiency.
That's certainly fair. If you expect the pass rate to come down a little bit, that the efficiency would naturally kind of rebound, right, a little bit for Mahomes there. Let's get into the backfield. You started hitting on it a little bit here. They do sign Kenneth Walker to the 3-year, $43 million deal, nearly $29 million guaranteed there for the Super Bowl MVP. Last year, there were 280 carries between Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, neither of which are on the Chiefs roster right now. And then I think you do have, kind of some pass down specialists in Amari DeMercado and Brashard Smith, as you alluded to there. And then Emmett Johnson as well. He is touted to be a positive in the pass game also. He's also not necessarily a very big back at 5'11", 200 pounds is Emmett Johnson. So, it is, I think Kenneth Walker, like the very clear favorite for early down work. We have Walker at 238 carries. Gretch is at 250. We're at 50 targets on Walker. Gretch is at 46 there. But overall, relatively similar inputs here, expecting Kenneth Walker to be, the primary workhorse back here. And then efficiency wise, we're about the same as well. We're at 4.27 yards per carry. Gretch at about 4.4. So a little bit higher on the efficiency Kenneth Walker. I know that's something we've kind of struggled with, like how with this high volume role, can the efficiency be there for Kenneth Walker? So Jack, obviously Walker signed to this big deal in KC. Talk through your expectations for him, since we are, pretty aligned on the inputs there. And then looks like for DeMercado, we're at 29 carries. Gretch is at 73. We're higher at Emmett Johnson. So, do we think Emmett Johnson is going to be the RB2 right away, or will that go to DeMercado? And then kind of who would be the handcuff back here as well if Kenneth Walker were to go down?
Yeah, I think for Walker, a lot of it kind of comes down to what we talked about with the team level stuff and just how much they run. I think that given the money they signed him, given how much of a talent gap he has over every other running back on the roster, he's clearly going to be their workhorse, at least on early downs, as long as he stays healthy. The backup situation I do think is interesting because Walker didn't play a whole lot on pass downs in Seattle. DeMercado did play a lot in that role in Arizona. And then you have Brashard Smith, who was at 0.35 targets per route run last year. And Emmett Johnson had a ton of catches over his final 2 seasons of college as well. It sounds like most teams don't have 4 running backs active on a given Sunday. And it sounds like Brashard Smith is leading for return duties, which could keep him active. And DeMercado, I think, likely has an early leg up on Emmett Johnson for, pass protecting Mahomes is the number one thing. So it could be a situation where in week 1, I don't even know if Emmett Johnson is like active on game day, but if Kenneth Walker goes down, he would actually be the guy that you want the most because DeMercado has never had more than 58 carries in a single season. Brashard Smith wasn't utilized a whole bunch as a rusher last year. Emmett Johnson did have 251 carries in his final season at Nebraska. So he's not huge, but I do think that there's some chance that he would be second in line for carries if Walker goes down, while potentially appearing 4th on the depth chart. It does sound there's been some buzz that Brashard Smith is even on the roster bubble. He had a big role on a per route basis last year as a pass catcher, but it sounds like he's leading for return duties, like I said. So I think that this running back room beyond Walker is one to watch in the camp, but that's kind of how I see it breaking down as of now.
I like that breakdown. I was saying, oh, go ahead.
Hold on, Gretch. Yeah, I just want to make one note before I let you go, and that is in the Coach Speak Index. When talking about Emmett Johnson, Andy Reid said he's going to help on special teams too. We've got him in that up back position on the punt team, which I thought was really interesting, just in the terms of roster, confirmation that Emmett Johnson would be the up back on special teams, which, I'm out of my lane a little bit here talking about like special teams roles, but I would imagine if you're the up back, you're, one of the main guys blocking for the punter there. And so to put a rookie is like, that they've got him in that up back position on that was on May 2nd in the punt team. I thought was pretty interesting and maybe like a bullish sign that Emmett Johnson would make the roster there. But again, something certainly to monitor.
Game day. You don't mean make the roster, but be active on game days.
Be active on game day. Right. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know. I'm guessing if Emmett Johnson does have a special teams role, I guess they would have four running backs.
I think they might have 4 active then. Yeah.
2 of them really mostly just for special teams. I mean, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter for Emmett Johnson if he's active or not in week 1, if he's mostly a special teams guy. What matters is that if he's the RB2 if Kenneth Walker goes down, and I think that he might be just because DeMercado has never sustained a long-term rushing role, but it is interesting.
Yeah, to the DeMercado point, and even the Brashard Smith's usage last year with the really high targets per out and 35 targets, 25 catches, despite basically not playing. I mean, for anyone who drafted him, like I drafted him a decent amount, 35 targets and 25 catches, you're like, where were those? I don't remember any of those happening. But for both of these guys, it's a bit like Samaje Perine and Jerick McKinnon before Perine. Both of those guys had years in this offense with more targets than carries, which doesn't happen a lot for secondary running backs. I love the way you guys have it projected. I ended up projecting DeMercado for 73 rushes. You guys only have him for 30. And we have them both around like 20 targets. You guys are basically saying that he's going to be that way. And then we both have Brashard Smith right around 20 rushes and 20 targets. Same thing. You guys have that role locked in a way that I agree with. I only really did DeMercado for that many carries because I have a note here that I didn't know how to split up the secondary running back carries at all. Johnson's a rookie. I didn't know if he'd be active on game day. Everything that Jack just talked through. You guys have a few more carries for Johnson. I still have more carries for Johnson than Brashard Smith, even though I have half as many targets. Johnson had low breakaway rates, but he had decent evasion, decent yards after contact, given the lack of big plays. He did have 85 catches over the past 2 years with okay receiving efficiency. Jack noted a little bit of a receiving profile. His RAS suggests, pretty average athleticism, but like he's one of these do-all backs, again, sort of similar to the Jonah Coleman thing. He can play on all downs. I like Jack's take that he could potentially be the guy that would play more if Kenneth Walker went down. The only question is the usage of rookies in this offense. I mean, it's been a little bit slow. It was even slow for Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. It was slow for Jalen Royals last year and Brashard Smith, and they got buzz in the offseason. It's been slow for a number of guys over the years. I wonder if Brashard Smith may be the one to take a little bit of a surprise year 2 step because it's year 2. And they were very slow with some other rookies that just ended up not being good, like a Sky Moore or something. So maybe I'm overplaying it. But I feel like Andy Reid has always been a little bit deliberate with his young guys, even the ones that have become good. He didn't play Rice a ton until later in the year. He didn't play Worthy until later in the year. Worthy had a great run into the postseason of that rookie year, but they kept those guys held back a little bit. So, and that's the other thing with Emmett Johnson I'm keeping in mind is just how much would they turn him loose. I think Reid's offense is a little bit complicated enough that they don't love turning a rookie loose into a feature role.
I think bottom line here is we expect Kenneth Walker to have a pretty massive workload here, especially on early downs. And just because he might not necessarily be in that third down pass role, he's still going to get targets. The screen game under Andy Reid has consistently been one of the strongest in the league as well. So we've been a little bit ahead of Kenneth Walker in ADP as of right now, have him as a good early second round pick. So certainly think the runway is very clear for Kenneth Walker after signing that big deal. And again, just not too much competition on the ground here for touches. All right, let's head to.
I completely agree with that. And just again, if they keep playing Mahomes the way they have with the secondaries and a lot of nickel and a lot of extra second DBs on the field, I mean, Walker's rushing efficiency could spike as well. I think he's a really intriguing upside from that perspective. But I had the same take with the backups. There's just not enough threat here. He's going to get a lot of work. They paid him a lot of money. It's going to be interesting.
In the wide receiver room here, Rashee Rice, wide receiver 1 headliner, and then Xavier Worthy as wide receiver 2. Rashee Rice, his target per out run numbers have been, just absolutely amazing in the Chiefs offense. Just hasn't been able to stay healthy the last couple of years or out of legal trouble. But before he was hurt last season, he was 4th in the NFL with a 32% target per out run. He had a 35% target per out run in 2024 before he sustained that injury as well, and then a 27% in his rookie season. All very good. The mid-30s numbers are elite, especially. So in terms of inputs for Rice, we have 124 targets. Gretch is at 155. Yards per target, Gretch a little bit higher there at 7.75. We were at 7.34. So this is a spot that it's just really tough to pin down. You have the obviously Rashee Rice hurt last year. Then he has a cleanup procedure on his knee, and shortly after has to serve 30 days in jail. So he was partially rehabbing his knee in prison. It's just been a very interesting offseason and a couple years here for Rashee Rice and in the news. But again, just an elite target earner and could, I think, lead the NFL in targets if he's healthy, and plays all season. So it's a very interesting stance. But yeah, Gretch, go ahed on
I'm
Rashee
way
Rice.
higher on the targets there, and I'm way higher on Worthy. And then I scroll down and I'm still higher on Kelsey. Do you guys have a lot of unclassified targets still? Joe?
We have a little bit of unlisted there. I was going to bring that up as something that potentially we could come up on some of these guys, mostly Worthy.
With Rashee Rice being in jail,
we have a little bit. You're 31 targets higher on Rashee Rice than us. We have a little bit of the term we've been using in Slack is idiot tax on Rashee Rice. I don't know if that's the most correct way to phrase it, but I'm not totally surprised that you're a lot higher on Rashee than us, because we do have, with you projecting kind of health and
I'm projecting that he doesn't get into more trouble, but that's a big projection. It's just the way that I do it, but it's not. I think you're doing it more accurately. I just don't have all the algorithms and everything built in to factor in the idiot tax. It's a little bit tricky on my end.
We do have 36 targets to an unlisted wide receiver here. So that's kind of just, are they going to sign someone? As I was looking through this, I honestly was I feel like Deebo Samuel could be a decent fit here. He's still a free agent wide receiver. I wonder if the Chiefs are going to add anyone here, because you have Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy up top. And then it's, again, Tyquan Thornton as the projected wide receiver 3 here. So lots of opportunity in this wide receiver room.
I mean, kind of, that's, I think, a great way of framing it. And to kind of start at the number 3 thing, I think a stat that shocked me, and I think would shock a lot of people, is to learn that Tyquan Thornton had 19 catches last year. This guy was not what we probably think he was. He played a lot early. He played 70% of the snaps in each of the first 3 weeks, but then he was at 51% as a season high after that, just like snaps. He was running routes. His ADOT was 27.8. It's probably the deepest I can remember. For like anybody. Like we were talking about Alec Pierce on one of the recent shows being over 20 on some real volume. This guy was purely a deep threat. Now, he's good at ball tracking, and he made some big plays, and he did a lot of stuff that Mahomes hasn't been able to connect with Xavier Worthy on. I do think Thornton's going to have that role, but this is like the Justin Watson role they had for years, that old receiver that was basically just a rotational wind sprinter. Thornton made big plays on it. He actually wound up with over 1,000 air yards on just the 19 reception. Or I guess I don't have the target number written down, but he had 438 actual yards and was actually somewhat productive. But it's just bombs basically. He makes a lot of these catches, and I don't know how you play that. I don't know how you play a guy who had 19 catches the next year and he's just completely reliant on deep efficiency. I actually have Jalen Royals for a really solid. I have him for the same amount of targets as Thornton, like co-wide receiver 3 role, because Royals was a guy, had a preseason knee injury, but he had an intriguing profile. They talked a lot about him playing all the different positions. They really liked him coming in, and he's a catch and run like talent, like a yak guy, which is very similar to Rashee Rice's profile. Actually, there were some people last year that were like, if Rice gets suspended, Jalen Royals is going to be that dude. He didn't really do it as a rookie at all, and maybe that means he's just not very good. I'm not sure, but I'm paying attention to summer hype on him because he's the one, or like you said, do they bring somebody in? But he's the one that makes sense to me as the wide receiver 3 because he can move around a little bit, do some different things, and they were pretty stoked about him last year before he had the preseason knee thing. Pretty intriguing prospect profile as well. They got the 2 new rookies as well. Cyrus Allen's a guy they drafted late. Jeff Caldwell's his college teammate. Caldwell's RAS is the second ever behind Megatron at wide receiver, a 4.31, insane jumps at 6'4" and a half, 216 pounds, but he's still a UDFA despite that. Finished up at Cincinnati after some other collegiate stops. Not a lot of production there. Cyrus Allen was also there with him at Cincinnati and also didn't have much production. They played with Sorsby, the guy that's been in the headlines, and Sorsby only had like 3,200 passing yards. Despite the fact that they're talking about him as a first-round quarterback if he didn't have the gambling stuff. And so these 2 receivers, to me, it's like, how did they not get more production playing with that guy at that level? Allen is a 5'11", 183, day 3 rookie. He did at least have 13 touchdowns at Cincinnati last year. But I'm kind of looking at Allen and Caldwell as more developmental guys. And then, to me, Jalen Royals is the one that looks like the potential wide receiver 3. But really, this gets back to why I have so many targets on Rashee Rice, and I have over 100 on Xavier Worthy as well. For sure, and I definitely see getting there at some point. That the unlisted targets are stuff that we continue to like wind down as the season approaches and the roster gets more. We get more confident in kind of the shaking out there. But I think after Xavier Worthy as wide receiver 2, I could see it going a ton of ways there. Just on the Thornton note as well, obviously Worthy hurt his shoulder week 1, missed a couple games, and in those games is really when Thornton, had a sizable role. And then once Worthy returned, he topped out at 43% of the routes for the season, averaged 29%. So not which is again, like the not even out on the field much. Yeah. The Royals thing I wanted to say is Royals to me, I'm viewing as like the Juju Smith-Schuster role from the last couple of years. Yeah, and that's something we probably need to talk more about is kind of how this wide receiver room plays out. Jack, I do want to get back to the top here real quick with Rice and Worthy and just your overall thoughts on them. Worthy, I think, is a tough one to pin down. I think Rice, we know, is going to be productive and a heavy target earner when he's on the field. Worthy kind of had that late season rookie promise, had a great playoffs, and then last year was derailed a bit by that early season shoulder injury. He's going at the 3-4 turn last year. Now he's around like pick 100 in best ball stuff. And so almost just on that fact alone, I feel like we should be more in on Xavier Worthy, but the targets per out run was pretty low last year at 19%. Where do you sit on Xavier Worthy specifically and his outlook going into year 3?
Yeah, I think Worthy's the most interesting guy in this receiving room. Not the best. That would be Rashee, but I kind of just don't think there's a whole lot to say about Rashee. But Worthy, had 6 straight games with at least a 24% target share, including the playoffs to end his rookie season. And then last year he hurt his shoulder in week 1. Andy Reid is on the record saying that they were, quote, afraid to do certain things with Worthy after that shoulder injury. He's apparently been a standout of the offseason program so far. Jesse Newell of The Athletic said that he would be the likely winner of a hypothetical team MVP award if that existed for the Chiefs. We're actually a little bit low on Worthy at the moment, which is another one where it's kind of like the Brian Thomas thing we discussed earlier, where I do believe that stuff where the player gets hurt and all of a sudden they're not themselves. So I think maybe that's one that we could come up on, especially seeing where Gretch is and knowing that he wasn't himself last year after getting the shoulder injury, like basically immediately. He got that, 5 seconds into the season.
He got it 5 seconds into the season, and then Marquise Brown had 16 targets, 10 catches, 99 yards, ton of manufactured stuff in that game in the Xavier Worthy role, at least as how it's going to go down in my mind forever. And then, as you said, Reid, it seemed obvious that his ADOT rose a ton in his second season, and he stopped getting all that manufactured stuff, which, by the way, everyone was hitting him going into last year as just a manufactured touch guy late in his rookie year. He wasn't able to do anything down the field, and it was like, yeah, I mean, you better be right that he doesn't get some down the field production, because if he does, that rounds out a really nice profile. Suddenly he didn't have any of the manufactured touch stuff last year. It was gone. His ADOT rose. And I think Andy Reid really just said it, like you said, that we didn't feel like we could do that with him. And that's what caused the ADOT to rise and everything else over the course of the season. My framing on Worthy is this, and I think he's a tough player to get right. For all the people that have said he's too small, he just can't succeed. Obviously, this year they were right. They have the right to victory lap that. I will also note on Worthy, one of the reasons I've always been really high on him, he was a 21-year-old rookie, 22 years old in year 2, and even young for those ages. His birthday's in April. This dude just turned 23 like a couple of months ago. He's younger than, I believe, both Jeff Caldwell and Cyrus Allen, the 2 rookies that the Chiefs got brought into this wide receiver room. Just, you can always do that with the age stuff. But in terms of whether you think this guy's career is already played out, which a lot of people are like, he's a bust, I would be skeptical at this age that I would already know that. My framing on him would be, had he had a really productive year last year, it would have been wildly impressive given the team issues, the shoulder issue. He had an ankle injury midseason as well, and clearly didn't have the same burst for for a few weeks in the middle of the season. That doesn't mean he'll definitely be good, but I think people are taking the poor second year as confirmation bias when they are sort of already out on him. And my framing of it would be, man, the second year was like one of the hardest hands you can get dealt, I think, for a young player. That doesn't, again, mean that you don't I still have lost some optimism for Worthy's career after the second year. I wanted more, even though he was playing through a lot of stuff. But again, they don't have a lot of depth here. I think they've had a lot in mind for him, both of the last couple of years, especially going into last year, and it just hasn't hit yet. It's one of these players where I don't want to miss the post-hype element of it either. I do think when you look at the other receivers behind him, and then Travis Kelce we got to get to. My perception on him is the efficiency rebounded due to like unsustainable big plays where they were just not guarding him. Like last year, Travis Kelce would run in like a leak play, be wide open on the sideline and catch and run up the sideline for like a 40-yard touchdown. Happened like 3 times. He also had like 3 plays where he tipped the ball to a defender for an interception that cost him games. I'm surprised that he came back. I thought he looked pretty done. His targets per route really cratered last year. Had never previously fallen below 20% in any year of his career. Was all the way down to 17.9%. Again, despite being wide open in some of these coverages, they're not really looking to get him the ball like clearly, but he's obviously still good enough, even at this age, with the different little skills to find space in zones and get open and gain yards when he's left alone. I do think he's still like going to get volume and be involved. But my point here would be there is nothing in this passing game, really. When you peel it back and you realize Tyquan Thornton, again, 19 catches, it's got, and especially when you're talking about the risk on Rashee Rice. I mean, I think it's really got to be a lot of Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. I have Rice at 155 targets. I only have Worthy at 107. I do like making the bet on Worthy again. I think he could beat that fairly easily if he starts getting more manufactured stuff in year 3. Another note on him this offseason, apparently he's put on weight, which a lot of people don't like. But again, when the guy's 23, he still needs to grow into his body a little bit. Like Braylon Allen's another one we've heard that on. He was another really young player. These are guys that most guys their age are still in college. And if they put on weight in college and then they test really well at the combine, we have a different perception of them. The fact that he's still putting on weight at this age is not weird. I'm willing to get back in on Xavier Worthy here.
Yeah, you looped Kelsey into the conversation. We have Kelsey with more targets, barely, than Worthy right now. You have it flipped. I think that that's probably one that post-show we can get higher on Worthy. And I think that the point you made about the Chiefs internally having high expectations about for Worthy, and then kind of aligning that with the Reed quote about the shoulder injury and not being able to do what they wanted last year. I think that that's pretty backed up by what they've done this offseason, or more so what they haven't done. I mean, they know Rashee Rice has off-field concerns. They know that Kelsey's aging. They didn't really prioritize adding any pass catcher. And they obviously had big additions at running back. But in terms of wide receiver and tight end, they didn't really prioritize that at all. And I think that you could use that as further proof that they have high hopes for Worthy.
One aspect I'm interested to see this year is Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy on the field at the same time. And in the last 2 years with Worthy on the Chiefs, they've only run 246 routes together with each other on the field. In those routes, Rashee Rice has a 33% target share, Xavier Worthy 19%, and Travis Kelce 21%. So it's been really condensed on those top three guys. But go ahead, Gretch.
Those were mostly, I think, last year, right after Worthy came back from the shoulder, or I guess he came back before Rice, but Rice came off the suspension and Worthy was clearly not 100%. So some of that where you said the 33% targets per out for Rice, it seemed very obvious Rice would be featured right off his suspension because Worthy wasn't 100%. He had the ankle thing around that time as well. Anyway, I think it'll still lean Rice pretty meaningfully, but I just wanted to add that caveat. It's a very small sample, and it was 100%. During a time when Worthy was at his most banged up, I think. Because then Rice was hurt again later in the year, right?
He was, yeah, and it was more a point of they just haven't played too much on the field together, and I'm interested to see what Worthy's target baseline would be with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce, kind of all three of those guys out there. On Kelce, Gretch, your note that the efficiency did come up again last year. Maybe that was due to kind of busted coverages or fluky plays. One thing that stuck out to me about Kelce that had me a little concerned, he only has 11 touchdowns the last 3 seasons on 362 targets. That's a 3% TD rate. I think I mentioned on Dalton Schultz, his has been 3.5% the last or since he joined the Texans, which is really low for a tight end. So Kelce being at 3%, I thought was shocking and a little bit of a, probably knock on him just age-wise too, not able to separate in those short areas as he, previously was. Quickness-wise, in the previous 9 seasons, it was 6% for Kelce. So, that's been cut in half. So even if the target volume can be there, I just wonder if the touchdowns and real kind of efficiency we saw from Kelce in his early years can rebound. But even with, us being lower than you, Gretch, we are above Kelce in the best ball market. So again, that's a spot where it's kind of we're probably in a good position if we're a little bit below you and above the best ball market there on Kelce.
He's one of the classic ones where, again, I wind up with a projection that suggests I might want to be on him, and I don't necessarily want to because it feels fragile. It's like a projection-based play, right? It feels small hit, big miss. He was at just below 1.5 yards per out run both of the last 2 years, up around 2 or above 2 every other main year of his career, 1.8 or higher every other year of his career. I mentioned that the targets per route was down to about 18%. It had been 20% plus, usually up around 23, 24, 25 in his prime years. His yards per, his ADOT in the prime years was up over 9 many of the years. The last couple of years, it's been down around 7. It's a lot more just underneath dink and dunk. It's not as much obviously attacking. And no one's saying he's the same guy, but there's also some stuff with the yak. It did rebound. His yards after catch per reception rebounded a bit last year, but the missed tackles forced per reception did not. The actual evasion, he always had some pretty solid numbers. They really cratered in 2024, came back a little bit in 2025, but still way below anything 2023 or earlier, any of his main years. He's very clearly in the numbers, not the same guy. I just want to highlight that for people that are like, oh, everyone's forgetting about Travis Kelce. It's in the touchdown rate that you talked about and those elements of it as well. I think you can get volume and you can get a floor of production for best ball and stuff. But I just, especially in managed, I just want to take bigger swings at tight end personally.
Yeah. So clearly tons of opportunity in this Kansas City Chiefs passing game. We're at ETR, we're a little bit uncertain on where it's going to go, but certainly a high ceiling there for these pass catchers. And again, a spot I do want to just note, they could be ripe for signing a free agent wide receiver here, just kind of given the lack of depth in that wide receiver room. All right, let's move on to the last team of the division here. That is the Las Vegas Raiders, who bring over Clint Kubiak as the head coach and play caller from the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. There, Kubiak will get the NFL Draft's #1 pick and Fernando Mendoza under center. Also, Kirk Cousins signed here in the offseason. And there's been a lot of, offseason rhetoric around how they want Kirk to play more than half the season. Kind of, I think some outlandish claims there in terms of how much Kirk will play. But, it kind of sounds like they're going to start the season with him. In terms of team level notes here, the Seattle teams last year were extremely slow paced, not many plays per game, and had the third lowest pass rate over expectation. The Seahawks were also 31st in usage of 11 personnel last year. So we think a lot of 2 tight end sets incoming here, especially with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer as the tight end room for the Raiders. They signed Tyler Linderbaum in the offseason, but still I think supposed to be a below average offensive line. Obviously they were one of the league's worst last year, especially when Colton Miller went down. The Raiders just could not block anything. So hopefully the scheme that Kubiak brings, as well as the Linderbaum signing and Colton Miller health, can help out this offensive line, but still expected to be a bad team as well. Their over-under is, around five or 6 wins here. So a lot going on here, Jack, with the Kirk Cousins, potentially starting Fernando Mendoza split. Right now we have an 80-20 split on Mendoza right now. But what are your thoughts on Kubiak coming to the Raiders and how the season outlook looks for Las Vegas?
Yeah, I was curious where Gretch would come in on the quarterback split, because I kind of do believe the Raiders quite a bit that they want to start Kirk Cousins. I think that head coach, GM, and Tom Brady there are pretty aligned on wanting to wait for Mendoza to be ready. The pass rate, I think that they want to run the ball as much as they can. Kubiak has done that at both of his past 2 stops. They had a -5% pass rate over expectation with the Saints in 2024, and in their 2 40-point games to start the year when everyone was healthy, they were at -9 and -13%, massively minus Pierre last year, and now they have Ashton Jeanty at running back and then Kirk Cousins / Mendoza at quarterback. Gretch comes in quite a bit lower on the pass rate than us. We're at 61.9%. Gretch is at 58.5. I think that that's another spot where it's just, I think there's agreement that they want to run the ball. It's just that given how bad they're expected to be, how much can they actually do it? So that's always a tricky one to middle. But I definitely agree they want to run it, and that's one where maybe we could relook at, and maybe we're a bit too high again with how bad they project to be. But I think the quarterback split is pretty interesting here. And it's interesting to me that Gretch is lower on Mendoza than us. We're basically right at best ball market. But I do agree directionally that I think they really want Mendoza to sit and learn from Kirk Cousins.
But you guys have you have a bigger split than even I do, and I have it 75% Mendoza, 25% Cousins. So I mean, I'm hearing you, but I was excited to see that you guys went because I'm seeing that stuff too, and I thought I went too aggressive toward Mendoza, and so I mean, the thing is they've had some quotes more recently that were sort of like, there's some early quotes here like they like to let him sit, they want to let him all that stuff, but then more recently it was like it doesn't always work out that way, and they keep praising his leadership and his approach. And I think they really like this guy's makeup, and he's their franchise future player. Like, I do think Cousins is going to start week 1, but he only got a 1-year, $11.3 million fully guaranteed deal. It is a 10-figure deal, but like very obvious bridge QB contract for a guy like him. And then the other element of this is that Kirk Cousins was bad last year. It was like real bad. And like Kyle Pitts we talked about on the Pitts show, like he broke out late in the year because it was just all checkdowns underneath, like throwing short of the sticks and stuff, but he couldn't drive the ball down the field. The stats are not very good. When I get through the projections, I look at the efficiency for the quarterbacks. When I do a 2-quarterback team, I usually lower the efficiency for the rookie. In this case, I went ahead and raised Mendoza's yards per attempt and brought Cousins down because Mendoza's also a guy who pushes the ball vertically more and has a good ADOT. And I think when he gets in there, they'll actually be able to push vertically more. That's sort of the prospecting on him. But yeah, as far as the pass rate, my win total expected pass rate is 62.5. I put him at 58.5 as a -4% PROE. You talked about some of those big Kubiak numbers where it's even more negative than that. I'm basically saying like, yeah, they're going to be in throwing situations. They're still going to run, which is like kind of the way Kubiak's done it. I don't necessarily know that he'll be able to stick to it, as Jack was saying. I do want to give a couple stats on the Raiders as a team from last year because it helps contextualize Brock Bowers and Ashton Jeanty and some of the skill position stuff. They had 5 games last year whereas a team, they did not get over 100 air yards. The rest of the NFL is totaled 17 such games, a little more than a half a game per team. Most of those came late in the season. There were 3 in week 18 when teams are giving up a little. Through week 10, the Raiders had already done it 4 times. Like in the early part of the season when they were supposed to be doing things right, 4 games where they didn't have 100 total air yards throwing down the field. The rest of the NFL had 5 total. So you're talking about like half of the Raiders games and like point something percent of the rest of the leagues. They scored 10 or fewer points 7 times in 17 games. They had fewer than 100 total yards multiple times. In week 6, they ran 30 offensive plays and had just 3 first downs. In stealing signals, I tried to look up really quickly what the most recent game was or season was where somebody had done that. The way that I wrote it was the most recent season a team had fewer than either of those was 2000, which is probably my cheeky way of getting past. There was probably some other team that had exactly 3 first downs or 30 plays. But the last time that someone had fewer than either of those numbers was 26 years ago. I mean, this is not just a normal outlier game. Then in week 15, they had another game with only 7 first downs. I mean, they had so many games last year where they were not just a non-functional offense. There was nothing. It was, and some of that was the offensive line. And I think Geno just really struggled behind that offensive line, was not getting the ball out. But they were dead last in plays. They were dead last in points by a lot, like well behind the Browns and every other team. Dead last in yards by a lot. Dead last in first downs. Dead last in rushing yards, rushing TDs, and yards per carry. If you go look at Ashton Jeanty's profile, he actually had some pretty good evasion and did some things well. But again, if you don't have an offensive line and you don't have a functional pass game that can even get 100 air yards to challenge secondaries, you're not going to have anywhere to run. It's really important context that this Raiders offense last year was putrid.
Love the context. Absolutely. I mean, they're rough. Yeah. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah. Just a note on the expected improvement from the offensive line, aside from the personnel stuff. I was talking to Brandon Thorne recently, the ETR offensive line guru, and I kind of put him on the spot and said, what percent of offensive line play do you think is coaching versus personnel? And he thought about it, and he said he thinks that it's about 55 to 60% coaching. So I think that getting Kubiak there is a pretty massive boost in terms of expected offensive line performance as well.
I was reading about on the Seahawks that a lot of their improvement in offensive line last year has been chalked up to the Kubiak scheme. I mean, that seems, yeah.
And for the Raiders last year, as Pete Carroll's son, infamously, that was the offensive line coach who I don't think had that like position at all in his entire career. You want
to talk about a cocoon hire? My God,
the old nepotism in the Raiders building there. So clearly, hopefully expecting a rebound here, and just going back to like the Mendoza and Kirk Cousins split and where we end up playing. I just think these first round picks, let alone a number 1 overall quarterback selection, is going to play earlier than like the team indicates almost all the time. I think last year we were quite a bit ahead of market on Jackson Dart and how many starts he was going to play, and like Russ even had Russ was not very good for the Giants to start, but he had a couple solid games, and then you kind of at the first sign of distress, real distress was pulled there for Jackson Dart. So I just think just kind of the general trends, despite what the team says, I always expect these new franchises to turn over to their first round pick again, especially if he's the number 1 overall pick.
It happened the year prior with Drake May, and they spent the whole offseason saying he was the youngest QB in the draft and he needed time to develop and all those things. That's not what they're saying about Fernando. What they're saying about Fernando Mendoza is he's the most mature rookie of all time. He's already the leader in the clubhouse. The way that he goes through his business, all of these things. I mean, you're right. It always works out that way anyway. I feel like it's going to for sure in this case, especially with the fact that Kirk Cousins ever since that Achilles injury, I mean, I just don't think he's going to look good. You mentioned like Russell Wilson actually looked pretty decent last year, and then Jackson Dart came in quickly.
For sure. And Mendoza, it's not the best like fantasy outlook. Again, we expect the Raiders to kind of run as much as possible. The weaponry here in the pass game is nothing super special outside of Brock Bowers, and then Ashton Jeanty, I think you can throw in there as well. So even in best ball, it's kind of like a late round target. Mendoza not the most exciting, does add a little bit through his legs and on the ground there, so could potentially contribute some rushing output. But for the most part, probably, I don't know, Cam Ward we saw was, like by far the worst fantasy quarterback in the league last year. I'm not expecting a ton of fantasy output for Mendoza, despite us, expecting him to play, I think probably like 12 plus games this season.
I read a Nate Tice thing on him, though. He just as far as what we can expect, he loved him on out routes over the middle. He noted he can make all the throws. He doesn't take anything off the offense's menu, and that, Kubiak should be able to build the scheme around him. That was sort of the take on him as a prospect. He scrambles a little bit. The one issue is he did take some sacks. So if they're not able to protect him, we may get a few sacks and we may get some mobility. We may not turn as many of the dropbacks into pass attempts as we want. And then if they're also a little bit more run heavy, just like despite the fact that they're trailing, like I'm kind of projecting it, you might not get enough pass volume. Like one of the things is whenever Cousins plays, I was talking about Pitts and the checkdowns, like Bowers may get like 1 million checkdowns, which might be kind of nice. But Mendoza does throw downfield. His ADOT's a little higher and he can hit into some of those spaces. I think like a bad version of him might be more like what Michael Penix has been for the Falcons. We talked about that, I think, on the NFC South one. But the ability to make all the throws to the sidelines and the deep intermediate opens up a lot in the scheme, and I think is going to be something that Kubiak's going to be able to build his run and play action stuff off of. Should be really exciting for some of the guys like Bowers. I mean, I'm pumped for Bowers with Mendoza for sure.
Yeah, I was just about to mention Kubiak's like play action efficiency and how often he goes to that as well. He is a big play action caller there. So I do think that could help Mendoza's efficiency, even if the volume isn't quite there. But let's go to the backfield here. I think with Kubiak coming over, we saw in the Seattle backfield, the split between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Ashton Jeanty handled almost every touch for this Raiders backfield last year. About 87% of the running back carries of the Raiders did Jeanty handle. Also had some good receiving production there. They drafted Mike Washington this season, who's kind of an athletic freak prospect, but really struggled to perform in college. Fumbling was a huge issue for him. So I think people are somewhat excited about Mike Washington. We have things way, tilted towards Jeanty in the touch department. Have him for 256 rush attempts and 63 targets. Mike Washington we have for 75 rush attempts and only 13 targets. We're actually pretty close on both of these with Gretch. Gretch is at 277 rush attempts on Jeanty and 69 targets there. Again, Gretch was, a little bit lower on pass rate. So the fact that he's not even that much further on rush attempts on Jeanty or that much higher, I should say, I feel like we're decently in line there. So Jack, it was a pretty brutal efficiency season for Ashton Jeanty. How are we kind of parlaying that into his second season here again with a new head coach, hopefully revamped offensive line in this environment? Kind of talk through us the thought process of where we landed on Jeanty's efficiency here going into his second season.
Yeah, I think efficiency is the big question, and Gretch comes in 0.34 yards per carry ahead of us. We're only at 4.1. Gretch has him at 4.4. That's one where maybe we could look at closer, because I do think he's going to get absolutely fed. It really is just the strength of the offense, the strength of the offensive line, and how many touchdowns he can get, because I think he's going to get basically as many touches as he can handle. When Kubiak got hired, he said something along the lines of, we want to get two backs involved. He did not hold that stance for very long. His more recent quotes indicate they basically want Jeanty to be a workhorse. He said, we've got to get our best running back on the field as much as we can. We want to put a lot of pressure on Ashton. You look at Christian McCaffrey, his play snap percentage is high. The great backs, they don't want to come off the field. Jeanty quietly had a 14% target share last year. A lot of that is that they didn't really have anyone else to throw to. But they didn't make major adds at running back this offseason. Mike Washington in the fourth round, I think, is potentially an early down thumper backup to Jeanty, but he's not a huge. The thing on him coming out was that the pass protection is supposed to be pretty rough, so I don't think he's going to get much involvement in passing situations. So it should be all Jeanty. I think pretty much all the time you get the Christian McCaffrey comp directly from Kubiak. So I'm not concerned at all about volume. Any concerns I have would strictly be from an efficiency standpoint and how high of a season this offense can sustain.
I had the same take on Washington. That I had saw the same notes on the pass protection, and then if you look at his collegiate profile, breakaway run rate is good. Some of that stuff is where the profile pops. The elite speed score. He had a great jumps. He had a 4.33 at 223. People were talking about how he's the size speed freak, but that's what you're talking about. You're talking about a secondary change of pace, probably outside zone runner, big play kind of guy. But like Jack was saying, he's not going to play on the pass down. I mean, maybe Dylan Laube is playing some on pass downs, but I had the exact same take that Jeanty's going to play a ton. I was looking back at some of my writing from Stealing Signals last year, just from watching all of the games, because my feeling on Jeanty is he was a disappointment for fantasy, right? Like that's what it felt like. He had some big games, I think we all kind of remember, but there was a lot of bad games there. And I was trying to contextualize that most of those bad games were him being brought down by the offense. But I think there are people that probably already think that he's a little bit of a bust. He had a 3.7 yards per carry last year. I wouldn't necessarily fault you for thinking that he's not that good. His prospect profile was elite in terms of like the evasion and the basically everything. And then he went in the top 10 overall, and then he has a tough first year, and people are like, well, he's the next Trent Richardson or whatever. Like, I mean, I've certainly heard that comp. What I was writing in Stealing Signals was when he actually did get into the open field. I went and read after a couple of his big games. When he actually did get in the open field, I was just like really impressed with, he like has this tendency to run at guys. I compared it to Derrick Henry. I wrote he's obviously not the same guy physically as Derrick Henry, or not the same shape or anything, but he knows that he's hard to tackle in a way that he's not afraid of contact. He just kind of runs dudes over. He wound up with a really strong missed tackles force rate anyway last year, even despite the 3.7 yards per carry. I mean, this guy's, if you get him into space, I think is a very, very good player. He did have some breakaway plays last year and some key moments. And he 73 targets and 53 receptions as a rookie. As Jack said, I don't think people realize how much he did in the pass game. He had a 60-yard receiving TD late in the season. He had that game where he had 100-plus rushing and a TD, and he had the long receiving TD. He had an early game with 3 touchdowns where he had some breakaways as well. And so I don't want to be too in on a guy. I mean, I ended up getting through the projection. I had to nuke his touchdown rate, as Jack was saying. It's the efficiency stuff with the bad offense. I had to go and nuke his touchdown rate from where I first set it because I had them scoring too many touchdowns as a team. I had to nuke Bowers too. You know, you have to go back through when you do these projections and make sure that the team touchdowns line up. And it's like, yeah, that's why Jeanty's projection is going to look a little bit worse. But as far as what he is as a player, I just wanted to emphasize there's stuff on the film about him when he actually got into space. And now you put the Clint Kubiak scheme there. If they're able to get him into some space, if they block better, if the scheme helps the offensive line, I think he could be in for a much better, much more efficient second year. That's why I went to the 4.4 yards per carry. He's a really talented player, and he may actually in this scheme be able to show that a little bit more.
One of the major problems with Jeanty, though, in fantasy this year is he's getting drafted extremely high once again. You know, you're not getting a discount here, even if like some of the public sentiment is he may, you know, be on that bust trajectory, which it just doesn't seem like the fantasy community is buying into that at all. He's currently going 11th overall on Underdog, and FFPC redraft he's going at 10th overall. So we've been a little bit behind. We're at like 15th, 16th overall on Jeanty.
It's a great point. He's going at the same spot he was last year, despite
I know it's crazy. And he's like going ahead of Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Walker, who, you know, like at this point, I'm like probably taking Kenneth Walker over Jeanty, just given my optimism over the offensive surroundings. I don't necessarily like think Kenneth Walker is a better player than Jeanty, but in terms of just like the fantasy outlook, I feel a little bit better about it. So I don't know. It's been tough. Like I want to get in on this guy with Kubiak coming over and just the prospect profile that you mentioned, Gretch. It's just, man, you're not getting a discount at all. And I don't think it's his price is going to drop throughout the offseason at all. If anything, you know, there might be like concerns over a split backfield. I think, you know, some of the comments Jack alluded to, I think as we get closer to the season, they're going to be like, no, Jeanty's our guy. And so I don't know, it's going to be a tough tie to get.
You talk about a rookie quarterback we're expecting to play 75% or more of the season. I mean, and maybe the offense is going to run even though they shouldn't, and some of these things, because they're just trying to start building something, right? Get their footing in year one under Clint Kubiak. I mean, I'm with you. It's the price is crazy. I want to be optimistic about him, and I was kind of defending my efficiency on him, but I don't want to be drafting a ton of Ashton Jeanty in the first round.
To another point on his receiving as well, I kind of memory hold, the Raiders sucked. Like Jeanty just got a bunch of garbage time dump offs to end the games. And looking at his splits, he had 13 targets in the first quarter and then 14 targets in each of the second, third, and fourth quarter. So the distribution there I thought was just one of those weird like statistical anomalies. You know, he pretty much had equal targets across every quarter of the game last year. And so it wasn't just like a garbage time, hey, let's dump it off to our rookie running back and get him some touches. You know, it was pretty consistent throughout the game.
Do you guys have any concern about the receiving under Kubiak? Because they didn't necessarily throw to the backs a ton in Seattle. I was a little bit, I gave him basically all of the running back targets, so that's helpful, but it's a little bit concerned. It's a little bit like Kyron Williams gets all of the receiving for the Rams, but it's like they only throw like 70 targets to the running backs in that Rams offense. I'm a little bit concerned that might happen here where it caps him a little.
Yeah, we have the team running back target share not all that high. Just adding up quick, we're around 16%, which is a little bit below average, I think, if you compare to last year. But a lot of it is just we really expect them to condense the targets. I mean, Lobby has pretty much been a special teamer for the most part, even if he had some pass catching chops coming out of college, and we're not really expecting anything or anything much pass catching wise out of Mike Washington. And so we get a decent receiving projection on Jeanty even without that many running back targets.
Yeah,
I think the lack of wide receiver talent has me more optimistic that more targets will go Jeanty's way as well. But yeah, let's get into this wide receiver room. And we can kind of just add on Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer here, I think, as well, because when you look at this wide receiver room, they signed Jalen Naylor in the offseason, but he's a 27-year-old. He's maxed out at 53 targets in his career. They have Trey Tucker here in the wide receiver room as well. Mentioned in Seattle that the Seahawks were 31st in 11 personnel usage under Kubiak. I definitely think that that's going to carry over to this season. They also have Jack Besh in the wide receiver room, who was a second round pick last year, but pretty brutal rookie season just in terms of target earning and even being able to get on the field. And then Dante Thornton as well, like pretty historically bad target per out run and yards per out run numbers there for Dante Thornton in the wide receiver room. So in fantasy, not much excitement around these guys. Though Jalen Naylor is currently the top drafted wide receiver at 151 ADP, which is pretty wild there. So Jack, it's not a wide receiver room that's earned many targets over their career. How do you see this one playing out here for the Raiders?
Yeah, this is one where we've come to market throughout the offseason. Early in the offseason, we had it projected pretty similarly to Gretch, where we had Tucker well ahead of Naylor. Right now we have Tucker at 65, Naylor at 60 targets, Gretch is at 81 for Tucker and 53 for Naylor. And I was pretty surprised early in the offseason that Naylor was going ahead of Tucker, just given the overall production last year. I mean, Tucker had an 18% target share, but Naylor is a little bit interesting. He got a 3-year, $35 million contract, 8.4 yards per target last year. And in the 3 games without Jordan Addison to start the year, he had a 15%, 24%, and 21% target share. So we have seen at least a little bit of an expanded target share when he's gotten the snaps. He just didn't get that many opportunities to showcase that in Minnesota. But like you said, on the whole, I don't think that this wide receiver room is all that interesting, just given how many targets we expect to flow through the tight ends and through Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah, Naylor had a 1.06 yards per out run last year, 1.07 the year prior, 0.55. Very limited route rate sample the year prior to that. But like, this is not a guy that has some hidden like per route excitement in his background. His targets per route have been in the low, like 10 to 12% every year over the last few. Yes, he's played with really good players, but yeah, and you mentioned the yards per target side of it has been good. My take on this is this has happened multiple times, and I can't think of great examples right now, but multiple times over the years that I've been covering the NFL where I feel like an individual team doesn't understand that production is really important at the receiver position more than they just think traits matter. I was really critical of their rookies on this series last year. They had drafted Jack Besh in the second round, also Dante Thornton, and they also Tommy Malott or whatever in the 7th round, right? And I was like, they don't have any receiver talent. They've built a horrible receiver room. None of these guys have really strong production profiles. Then they go out and they sign Naylor to a big contract, and he just looks like a secondary receiver. He's not like a dude. I think the fantasy market's just like, oh yeah, they paid him. He's going to get a bunch of routes and targets. Like, the guy's got to be good. I mean, it's just a problem for the passing game if they're not actually good players. Then they drafted a 6th round rookie, Malik Benson, another guy, fast 40 time, 5'11", 189 pounds. He started his career at Bama, then went to FSU, then Oregon, obviously viewed favorably within college football, but the production wasn't amazing. He's got a very limited like return profile. Maybe they'll use him as a returner. I don't know, but he's basically just a straight line deep threat. It's kind of similar to Deontay Thornton I talked about last year. It was like, yeah, he's got the traits and he's a deep threat, but he didn't have any production even in college. You can't just expect a guy to become a ball tracker and win against NFL defenses more designed to take away deep stuff if you can't even be an efficient deep player at the college level. It's production is so key in understanding these guys to the next level. And I think the Raiders are just, as an organization right now, And I understand like Tom Brady knows way more, he's forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. And knows way more than I do. And everyone there is obviously smart guys. But I think their view of the pass catchers, particularly the wide receivers, because I think Brock Bowers is like the opposite of this. He's the guy who had massive amounts of production all throughout college, but is just so skewed and they're not looking for the right type of players. And it's kind of bizarre. I want him to just get one good receiver so I can expect that guy to earn 1 million targets, but they don't have any. Trey Tucker has been all routes volume the past 2 years, but I think maybe he can get some efficiency spikes with the better offense. They've seemed to talk about him more when I read through the offseason quotes. I'm not that high on Naylor, but maybe Naylor can get there a little bit as well. And then Jack Bech is the other one. I'm like, I guess I want to be open to him as, a second-year player. He had a little bit of efficiency. But again, a second rounder who only earned 193 routes and a 15% targets per route on an offense that had no wide receivers is bad. Like, that is a really poor rookie year, because when you have the second round pedigree, the team's expecting more out of you. They often just give you the runway to be that player. It's a concerning first year. His yards per target were at least a little bit okay in an offense that otherwise most players were pretty poor. Thornton looks like irredeemably bad, I guess is the way I would put it. I mean, he could be out there running off safeties and stuff, but as far as who it could be, part of the reason I'm a little lower on Naylor is I have Bech higher than you guys as well. I have Bech and Naylor both at 53, and then I have Tucker ahead at 81. That's kind of how I split it. You guys have Tucker and Naylor closer, and then Bech pretty far behind, and in that mix with Thornton and Benson. I mean, who knows? You guys could totally have it right. I have no idea, but that's the way that I thought about it. The one thing I'll say is, I mean, like, we might as well just talk about Brock Bowers more. I got Brock Bowers for 139.
Before you get there,
okay.
Before you get there, I do just want to like hit on this point of like this wide receiver room is it's really tough to give targets, across, because it sounds like all of us think, no one necessarily has like earned it throughout the course of their career to get into a high target role. And I always get concerned over like the dead zone running back, conversation of, hey, well, this volume has to go somewhere. We got to give it to this guy. Like, I have a concern over this wide receiver room specifically, where it's like the guys that are on the roster now, I think like when we look at our preseason projections versus the end of season projections, we could just laugh and be like, oh my gosh, we had Jack Bech for 60 targets and he only, played or ran 30% of the routes and had like 30 targets, kind of thing. I think we could be way off there. And ultimately it does come down to, okay, how many targets can we give to Brock Bowers? So Gretch, I'll let you take it away there on Bowers. The ceiling here seems pretty limitless in this offense. We are at input wise on Bowers at 128 targets. Gretch is at 139. So again, he's, naturally leaned a little bit higher, but I mean, it could be a massive, massive ceiling here for Brock Bowers.
But yeah, I mean, you say 139 is leaning high. He had 153 as a rookie 2 years ago. I mean, and some of that was he ran a ton of routes in that offense that year, but last year he played a big chunk of the year hurt, and like he got hurt in week 1 and was legitimately hurt trying to play through it for a while. Then they had to shut him down. His per route numbers took a big dip as a result. His routes also did. He still had a 1.70 yards per route run. He was still efficient. Like I just talked about how Bech's 7.7 yards per target was like okay in this offense. Bowers was still at 7.9 at a lower ADOT, and like I have this depth adjusted racer I use for my projections, and he looks like really good both years. Like you wouldn't know that he was injured last year, and that's again gets back to the prospect profile where he even had like the rushing production at Georgia. The ball and hand stuff was so elite in this guy's profile. He's playing with a bum knee and he's still way better than expected in terms of the yards per target and the efficiency when the ball's thrown to him. He just, lost a lot of routes and was not able to be as dominant and earning volume in terms of like targets per route and those things. I didn't know where to put him with the targets. Part of the thing, I have this big bold thing here. Team tight end targets getting out of hand. Like, because I have Michael Mayer for a lot as well. I have them at 37% of the targets going to the tight ends. The last 2 years, for reference, 30.5 and 31.3 by my numbers. Even in 2024, when Bowers had the 153 targets, they were only at 31.3 because they had more targets. They had more volume overall that year to go around. Jacoby Myers was still in the offense. He had 120 for the wide receivers. What I have this year is such a low number for the total wide receivers. It seems like you guys have the same. I felt like that was uncomfortable. It seems like you're seeing it similarly, and I feel better about it because I do think they're going to do a lot of 2 tight ends. I do think they're still going to throw to Mayer, but why would they ever take Bowers off the field? And I don't think they will. And again, this idea that I mean, I feel like it's coming in hot at 139 targets. That 139 is a lot, is fair, but also needs to be noted that Brock Bowers had 153 as a rookie. He's going into his third year. He's going into his prime. This guy still profiles as one of the greatest tight ends, literally of all time. I know that sounds absurd, but that's what his prospect profile was, and that's what he did as a rookie. Last year played hurt for most of the year. This is like Hall of Fame level player already. And I know, but we talked about this last year as well. Like, you have to understand the trajectory. We're looking for outliers in fantasy football. I talk about it every year we do this stuff. Brock Bowers' stats and numbers and all of the stuff is outlier stuff. And again, last year played hurt. So I want to be in on the rebound season for sure.
This is a spot that the ball knowers in our ETR Slack continuously are like, man, we need to get Brock Bowers higher in the ranks. I know Silva is super high on him. We had Trey McBride over Bowers for a little bit, just in terms of tight end rankings. I think we've since flipped that and now have Bowers as a tight end one. But certainly, I think the upside is there. You also have the efficiency for Bowers at 8.1 yards per target. We're more like 7.8. So I think even maybe a little bit more room to come up on Bowers just to try and be bullish and above market on him.
He's been 7.8 both of the first 2 years, but I'm like, well, he was hurt last year and he's just going to get better.
Yeah. And it's just hard.
I think the efficiency is where we could come up if we were to come up, because we're fairly full on volume. You still are ahead of us on Bowers targets, but you're just, with the way we're doing this, you tend to come in ahead of us on most guys. And we are only 11 targets back of you on Bowers. On the tight end one battle, we did recently move Bowers, I guess you'd say, to tight end one, but I really think what happened is we were a little bit too high on Trey McBride, and so we docked McBride recently, just expecting Bowers to separate more in terms of what their respective target shares should be within their offense. So we do now have Bowers at tight end one, but it's not because we bumped Bowers, it's just that we docked McBride recently, although I do think there might be a little bit of room for us to come up on the yards per target, expecting more efficiency in the Kubiak offense.
When you say that you're pretty full up on targets, you're probably thinking rookie QB. I mean, because relative to the fact that, I mean, also that your projections come in a little lighter as well, naturally, right?
Yeah, that and the fact that we're projecting him for one of the highest target shares in the league already, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky and Gretch, like I'm trying to keep, all the kind of like team level, just historically bad results that the Raiders had last year. It is, even though it is a new coaching staff, sometimes it's hard to like disassociate from that fully, when projecting this upcoming season. So that's something I'll probably drill down even further on, just like on a team level. Okay, how can we kind of probably bring this up to a more appropriate level for the Raiders? But it's hard with these new spots with all the turnover.
Totally. You guys do have more for Mayer than me, and I thought about that a lot. He had more last year, but Bowers was hurt, right? And then if you go back to 2024, the rookie year, he only had 32 targets. I have him at 39 for this coming year. You guys have him at 52. So probably just take all those Mayer targets and give them to Bowers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one too where, again, we are expecting a bunch of two tight end sets from Kubiak, and just with the lack of wide receiver target earning ability, if we've kind of lopped it on to the tight ends. But I think, Gretch, you mentioned you're at 37% of team targets to the tight ends. That's exactly where we are as well. So I do think the gap is probably just, a little from Mayer to Bowers there. All right, that will do it for episode 3 of the Divisional Projections series. Appreciate all you tuning in with us today. The next episode will be featuring the NFC West. Thanks again to Jack. You can find him on Twitter at JackMiller02, and Gretch is at Yards Per Gretch. You can also find his podcast, Stealing Bananas with Sean Siegel, and find his work at bengretch.substack.com. Been a blast recording with you two fellas again, and excited for episode 4. So again, that will be covering the NFC West. Appreciate all you guys tuning in. Peace out.